downstairs?
Yeah.
Alright, we won't go into we'll just go over some things briefly about the author. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيده يا رب لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد المفتاح باب رحمة الله عبد في علم الله صلاة والسلام دائما لدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة مرة رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Today inshallah we're going to begin the science of Aqida with a book called Al-Marifa في بيان عقيدة المسلم للعلامة المرحوم الشيخ عبد الكريم الرفاعي رحمه الله تعالى. So this book is a small book, but in the same way we say don't judge a book by its cover, don't judge a book by its size. It's small in size, but it has a vast amount of information a person needs when they study the science of Aqida, as an introduction to the science of Aqida. Because Aqida, like all the ulum, is a science, right? We have science of Nahu, of Sarf, of Tafsir, of Balagha, of Fiqh, and Aqida is one of them, and Aqida is the most important one of them because Aqida is the reason we are doing everything we're doing as Muslims. Everything, why we pray, why we fast, why we avoid the haram, why we seek the halal, it all relates to our Aqida, our Islamic belief. So there are many books written in Aqida. Before we get into the major books or more intermediate books, I wanted to first get down the principles of Islamic Aqida, which are taught in this book very well. So we have the books ordered, but they're still taking some time, but the PDF is available free online. Now this book is in Arabic, so I'm going to read it in Arabic obviously, but I'm going to translate it. But inshallah ta'ala, even though it's in Arabic, we will explain it as best as we can. But if you can read Arabic, the book is widely available for free online, and there are many videos of different scholars explaining the book, right? First of all, what is marifa? Marifa, we usually understand it to mean gnosis or knowledge. So it is knowledge fi bayani aqidat al-Muslim. It is knowledge in the explanation of the creed of the Muslim by Sheikh Abdul Karim al-Rifai. Sheikh Abdul Karim al-Rifai, he was a scholar from Damascus, from Syria, right? He passed away 1294 after Hijrah, and he was one of the scholars of Damascus. He was also a student of Sheikh Badr Din al-Hassani, who was considered the Muhaddith of Sham, the top scholar of Syria and Damascus during his time, rahimahullah. And Sheikh Abdul Karim al-Rifai was one of his students, and it was said that he didn't leave. He was with Sheikh Badr Din al-Hassani, I think 8 or 18 years every single day without missing. 8 or 18 years he was with the Sheikh every single day. Sheikh Abdul Karim al-Rifai was also part of the Independent Council of Islamic Scholars in Syria, and he has 3 sons, Sheikh Sari al-Rifai and Sheikh Abdul Karim al-Rifai, both who are alive, but they're in Istanbul, right? So I didn't personally meet Sheikh Abdul Karim al-Rifai, Sheikh Usama al-Rifai, who's the son of Sheikh Abdul Karim, but I sat in with some talks that were being given. And Sheikh Usama al-Rifai is basically considered the Mufti of Syria, freely elected, not by the government. So the Syrian scholars in Istanbul, they elected Sheikh Usama al-Rifai, who's the son of Sheikh Abdul Karim al-Rifai, as the free Syrian Mufti of Syria. Free Syrian Mufti of all Syria, right? And Sheikh Usama al-Rifai, he is basically the one who gives fatwa for the Syrians in the situation they're in right now. Even our teacher, Sheikh Nader Abu Umar, he would take fatwa from Sheikh Usama al-Rifai, right, in relation to the situation that Syrians are experiencing. So this Sheikh Abdul Karim al-Rifai, who's a very strong Syrian scholar coming from a very strong scholastic family, rahimahullah. So this is in relation to the book, and this book has a foreword by Sheikh Muhammad Sa'id Ramadan al-Buti, rahimahullah, who's also a great Syrian scholar, where he writes about the greatness of this book and the greatness of Sheikh Abdul Karim al-Rifai, rahimahullah. I'm not going to read that foreword. I'm going to actually get into the book, inshallah ta'ala. So keep in mind, this is a book in Arabic, so it's going to take a little bit more time than usual because as we said, we want to read Arabic books. So I'm going to have to read and translate, right? This is going to take a little bit more time than usual, as opposed to if we all knew English, or we do all know English. If we all knew Arabic, it would go by much faster. Because I need to read and translate, we're going to have to be a little bit patient. And like I said, if you see me slurping this smoothie, then just be patient because I'm hungry and thirsty. Tamam. All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. مقدمة المؤلف. So I'm going to read the introduction of the actual author, Shaykh Abdul Karim Rifai rahimahullah. He says, الحمد لله الذي أوجب على خلقه العقيدة الحقة. He says, all praise is due to Allah, who necessitated upon His creation the true Aqida, or the true belief, or the true creed. وأمرهم أن يتمسكوا بالبراهين القاطعة. And He ordered them to hold firm the decisive, clear evidences and proofs. القائل, the one who said, قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن اتبعني. Right? قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن اتبعني. And this is in Surah Yusuf, right? Say that this is my path. This is an instruction to the Prophet ﷺ, where it's being said that this is my path, and I call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Upon basira. What is the definition of basira? Basira is having your heart and seeing open and seeing with your heart. So you have basar, that comes, what organ is related to? The eyes. And basira is related to the heart. Seeing with your heart, meaning accepting the truth. Right? Ana wa man ittaba'ani. Me and those who follow me. Right? I and those who follow me. والصلاة والسلام على نبيه الهادي إلى السبيل الواضحة. And peace and prayers be upon His Prophet, the guide to the clear path. المبين القواعد السعادة والنجاح. The one who made it clear the principles of felicity and salvation. وعلى آله وصحبه الذين اقتفوا أثره. And upon His family and companions, those who followed Him in His traces, those who followed Him in His way. وَدَعَ النَّاسِ إِلَى هَدْيِهِ. And they called people to His guidance. وَبَيَّنُوا أَحْسَنَ الْبَيَانِ. And they clarified the best of explanations. Right? This is what we call, when you study any book, it's called Bara'atul Istihlal. What is Bara'atul Istihlal is basically, based on how I start my introduction, you know what I'm going to talk about. Right? So if I said, Alhamdulillah alladhi qahhara ibadihi bil maut. All praise is due to the one who subjugated His servants with death. What do you know I'm going to talk about? Death. If I said, Alhamdulillah alladhi wajaba alayna as-siyam. All praise is due to the one who made fasting obligatory upon us. What am I going to talk about? Fasting. So here, he says, Alhamdulillah alladhi awjaba ala khalqihi al-aqidah as-sahih al-haqqa. All praise due to the one who necessitated upon His creation the correct aqidah. So what do you know we're going to talk about in this book? Aqida, right? وبعد فلما كان درس التوحيد المبتدئين في حاجة إلى تلخيص عقيدة المختصرة. He says, when it came to that, the lessons of Tawheed for the beginners was in need of a summary of Aqidah, right? ممزوجة بالبراهين العقلية, that is coupled with intellectual proofs and evidences, والآيات القرآنية, and ayats from the Quran. اضطرني ذلك إلى عمل هذه العجالة. I was coerced, or I was forced, or I was pressured in order to make this action with haste, right? And this is usually when you see scholars, this is how usually they'll start their books. They say, some brothers, some of the ikhwa, some students of mine, some fellow scholars, they ask me to write a book on this subject, right? Virtually every scholar, you'll see when he writes a book on any subject, what's he going to say? He's going to say, due to the need, or due to the asking of fellow students or fellow mashayikh, I'm going to write this book. That's why I was asked, right? This is part of their tawada, this is part of their humility. We shouldn't be like, I just want to write something, get my name out there, and No, they wrote this because they were actually asked, or they saw a need. Why? They have to write this. تمام. وأرجو الله أن يقبلها. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He accepts it from me. ويجعلها خالصا لوجه الكريم. And that He makes it sincerely for His sake. إنه قريب مجيب. He is al-Qarib and He is al-Mujib. تمام. So now مقدمة علم. Right? The introduction to knowledge. إن مبادئ كل فن 10 الحد والموضوع ثم الثمرة وفضله ونسبة والواضع والاسم الاستمداد حكم الشارع مسائل والبعض بالبعض اكتفى ومن درى الجميع حاز الشرف. These lines are usually written in books that give you, it's 3 lines of poetry that tell you every single knowledge has a founder, a benefit, what we talk about, what is its ruling, and what are the topics covered in this science. In every Islamic science, you have to understand there's things we're going to talk about. So because we're talking about Aqida, nobody should be asking the teacher, what's the ruling on Salah in a train? This is not related to Aqida, right? If you're in the science of Tajweed, and you ask an Aqida question, that's not the place. If you're in the science of Hadith and you ask a let's say a question on chemistry, that's not related to the subject matter, right? Every subject has 10 points that in order to understand this subject or every subject matter, you need to understand these 10 points. So we're going to go through them one by one. So, فالحد. What is the definition of a had? Had here means definition. Sometimes it means limit, but here the had, فالحد, is the definition. What is the definition of Aqida? What are we talking about when we say Aqida? He says, or what are we talking about when we talk about Tawheed? What is the definition of Tawheed? He says, تعريف العلم التوحيد لغة العلم بأن شيئا واحد. So when we say the word Tawheed, we hear this a lot as Muslims, right? Tawheed. But we have to understand, what does this term Tawheed mean? Linguistically, Tawheed means knowledge of a thing being one. What does Tawheed mean linguistically? It means knowledge of something being one, or judging something as being one. Linguistically, this is what Tawheed is, right? وشرعا, right? هو إفراد المعبود بالعبادة مع اعتقاد وحدته وتصديق بها ذاتا وصفاتا وأفعالا. So usually when we have a definition in any Islamic sciences, we have a linguistic definition and a religious or technical definition. Any word, you're going to find usually it has a linguistic definition and a technical definition. So for example, what is the linguistic, now it's the word Sawm. We translate as fasting. What is the linguistic definition of Sawm? Imsak. Abstain, imsak, right? Linguistically, what does Sawm mean? Imsak, abstaining. But technically, what does Sawm mean? Sawm means abstaining from the invalidators from the time of Fajr until the time of Maghrib, right? Or if I said to you Salah, what's the linguistic definition of Salah? What is linguistic? What would Salah mean? Dua. Linguistically, Salah means dua. But what is Salah in the technical or the Shari'i definition? It means a specific act of worship with arkan, with shurut, with invalidators, right? This is what we call Salah in the technical terms. So in Tawheed, linguistically, when we say Tawheed, linguistically it means what? It means knowledge of a thing being one, or judging something as being one, right? No. وشرعا, now religiously, what does Tawheed mean? هو إفراد المعبود بالعبادة. It is singling out the worshipped with ibadah. مع اعتقاد وحدته. With the belief in His oneness, والتصديق بها, and believing in it, right? Or affirming the oneness, His oneness. ذاتا وصفاتا وأفعالا, right? Oneness in His self, attributes and actions, right? So what are we talking about? We say Tawheed, shar'an, religiously, technically. It is affirming Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being one in His self, attributes and actions. And that He is the only one worthy of worship. This is what we mean by Tawheed, right? Shar'an, legally, what is Tawheed? Affirming that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. and His self-attributes and actions, and that He is singled out for worship alone. He is the only one worthy of worship. This is what Tawheed means religiously in the Sharia, right? So keep in mind, when you study any Islamic science, you're gonna you want to know what's the linguistic definition of the word and the religious or technical definition of the word. Why? Because the scholars say there will always, one of my teachers said, there will always be a relationship, a nisbah, between the ta'rif that is lughawi, the linguistic definition, and the ta'rif that is shari, the legal definition. Even if you look at, what do we say? Som. Som, we said linguistically means abstaining. Isn't this related to the technical definition that we know what Som is? Because Som is abstaining from certain invalidators, right? From dawn until sunset. So usually, always there will be a relationship between the linguistic definition and the technical definition or the legal definition. Tamam? So what do we say? Tawheed is the knowledge linguistically, knowledge of a thing being one. Religiously, it means affirming Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one in His self-attributes and actions, and that He is singled out for worship, the only one worthy of worship. Is that clear? Yes.
I'm just confused a little bit on al-had. Is that like just a where is it defining?
Had means what when we say Tawheed or Aqida, what is the definition of that? Let's say you never heard the word Tawheed. You need to know what it means, right?
Yeah.
So the had here means the definition of that particular thing. Okay. Sometimes had we usually mean to mean a limit. But here in this context, technical meaning, it means the definition. And how is it related? Because when you define something, you have to limit. When you define something, aren't you limit? Let's say, for example, I'm defining fiqh. Am I not limiting it by not being confused with, let's say, tafsir? I'm putting a limit in what this is in terms of what am I defining it as? Okay. Right? You see how sometimes why they were using the word had?
So that's the had for the ilm. Is like for the ilm of the book.
Yeah. So if I define something, can I use unlimited words of how to describe it? Like let's say I want to define what a roller coaster is. Can I use unlimited words in how to define it? No, I have to use a limited amount of words to tell you what it means. Right? So that's why you say this is why we're using the word had for definition. Because also you guys learned with Sheikh Harun maybe that the definition has to be what? Jami' wa mani', right?
Yes.
What is that? It has to be inclusive and exclusive when you define something. Like if somebody says what is a woman? A woman. Okay, you haven't defined it for me. You can't. It has to be mani', meaning it has to take some things out. You can't use the same word in the definition of the word, right? So somebody asks you what is tawheed, and they say it's tawheed. You haven't defined it. You need to make it specific in what you include and what you exclude from the definition. Is that clear?
Okay.
تمام. ومعنى الفن المدون, right? And in relation to the meaning, as something that is fan is like an art, but here you can mean it as a science, right? علم يقتدر به على إثبات العقائد الدينية من الأدلة اليقينية, right? Or how is it known? What is the definition of Aqida on paper? It is a knowledge that علم يقتدر به على إثبات العقائد الدينية من أدلة اليقينية. It is a knowledge that we're using for religious proofs with certainty, with sources of certainty, from a practice of certainty. When you talk about Aqida, we're not going to use things that we doubt, that are doubtful, right? We're talking about Aqida, we're not going to use sources that we doubt, or we're speculative, or maybe, we're not sure. We're not going to use something that we're not sure we believe in. No, we're going to use things that are confirmed as something we believe. Tamam? موضوعه. Now, موضوع is like a place, right? Here it means, what is the topic? What is the topic of Aqida? When we say the word Aqida, what is the موضوع? What is the topic? Right? He says, ذات الله سبحانه وتعالى من حيث ما يجب له وما يستحيل عليه. So what is the topic of Aqida? He says, it is the self of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in relation to what is necessary, what is impossible, وَمَا يَجُوز, and what is possible in regards to him. In other words, what is the discussion about when we talk about Aqeedah? We're talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what is necessary and possible and possible in his right. And we're going to go over these terms. Al-wajib, al-mustahil, wal-jaiz. Right? I don't have a poem that I'm going to make you guys memorize yet, but there's going to be some technical terms I'm going to tell you have to memorize and you have to know what these mean. So not now, but later on I'm going to tell you what is wajib, what is jaiz, what is mustahil. Right? وَذَاتُ الرُّسُلُ كَذَلِكَ وَالسَّمْعِيَاتُ مِنْ حَيْثُ اعْتِقَادِهَا. And likewise, in relation to the prophets themselves, what is the discussion of the topic of Aqeedah? It is in relation to also what is necessary, impossible, and possible in relation to the prophets, right? And what we believe about the sam'iyat, the unseen, which we also have to affirm. So in this book of Aqeedah, and most books of Aqeedah you will study, you're going to learn what is necessary to attribute to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is impossible to attribute to him, and what is possible to attribute him. 3 things. You're also going to learn what is necessary to attribute to the prophets, what is impossible to attribute to the prophets, and what is possible to attribute to the prophets. And you're also going to learn about the sam'iyat, those things from the ghaib that we as Muslims must believe. In short, this is what we're going to discuss in Aqeedah. That doesn't mean it's easy. That doesn't mean that there's going to be a lot of discussion. No. But generally speaking, this is what you discuss in Aqeedah. Right? We're going to learn. First, we're going to talk about what is called the ilahiyat. So we're in relation to the correct belief about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is necessary for him? What is impossible in his right? What is possible in his right? Then we talk about the prophets. What is necessary for them? What is impossible for them? What is possible for them? And then what we have to believe as Muslims from the world of the unseen. Belief in Jannah and Jahannam, for example. Is that clear? Tamam. Then he says, thamara. The thamara. What is the thamara? What is the benefit or fruit of Aqeedah? What benefit will you get when you study Aqeedah? Right? He says, Ma'rifatullah ta'ala bil barahin al-qati'ah. It is having knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with decisive proofs. وَالْفَوْزُ بِالسَّعَادَةِ الْأَبَدِيَّةِ وَالْفَوْزَ بِالسَّعَادَةِ الْأَبَدِيَّةِ. And having the success, the felicity, the everlasting success and felicity in the hereafter. So what is the benefit when you study Aqeedah? You will have marifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with decisive proofs, and you will have victory with everlasting happiness in the hereafter. Why? Because you passed away on the correct Aqeedah. Right? Is that clear? On the thamara, what is the benefit of Aqeedah?
Say one more time.
So it's marifatullah ta'ala bil barahin al-qati'ah. بالبراهين القطعية. It is the not having knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with decisive proofs. Proofs that have no doubt, no shakiness in them. Right? وَالْفَوْزِ بِالسَّعَادَةِ الْأَبَدِيَّةِ. And success in everlasting happiness. Meaning success in the hereafter. Right? What time is it right now?
7:45.
Alright. Clear so far? Then he says fadluhu. What is fadl meaning? The rank or the greatness of this science. What is the rank? What is the greatness of the science of Aqeedah? Right? إنه شرف العلوم لكونه متعلقا بذاته تعالى. He says that Aqeedah is the noblest of science because it relates to the belief in what we have in regards to the belief about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَذَاتُ رُسُلِهِ. And the prophets. وَمَا يَتَّبِعْ ذَلِكَ. And what follows that. Because we have a qaida, principle, that says شَرَفُ الْعِلْمِ بِشَرَفِ الْمَعْلُومِ. The nobility of a science is in according to what? The nobility of what that science discusses. Okay? That's why Islamic sciences will always outweigh every other science. Right? If you're studying fiqh, this will always outweigh studying gender studies. Right? Of course, there's no comparison. Because sharaf al-ilm bi sharaf al-ma'lum. The nobility of a science is the nobility of what you're studying in that science. So in the science of Aqeedah, we're talking about the names and the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the greatest in status, the highest in status, the most supreme in status. Whatever subject discusses him, then this is going to be the greatest ta'im. The greatest ta'im we're going to. So if we're talking about tawheed, like you can't say that there's a subject which doesn't talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being better than a subject that is talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So because we're talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this subject is the greatest. And because we're talking about the prophets in this subject, and the prophets are the best of creation, this subject is also the greatest. So every other science, I'm not saying this because I'm teaching Aqida. Okay? It's not a bias. Aqida is the greatest of all the ulum and the best of all the sciences. Because every other science is based off Aqida. Why do we study fiqh? Because it goes back to Aqida. Right? I'm not saying this because I'm the Aqida teacher. Any scholar will say, what's the most important science a Muslim needs to learn? They will say Aqida. Yes.
Does that correlate with the reward that you get for studying something? Like the higher the fadl, the higher the reward that you get?
Could be. Right? But that doesn't mean that we don't study the other sciences. No, they're also important. Fiqh is important. Tasawwuf is important. Mustalah hadith is important. They're all important. But you have to have priorities. If you're studying tafsir and you have a wrong belief about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your dars of tafsir is not going to benefit you. Right? If you're studying fiqh and you have wrong beliefs about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your fiqh is not going to help you. Right? Yeah.
Could you just repeat the definition?
So he said, the fadluhu annahu sharaf al-ulum. It is the noble list of sciences. بِكَوْنِهِ مُتَعَلِّقٌ بِذَاتِ تَعَالَى. Because of its being connected to what we believe about the self of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَذَاتُ رُسُلِهِ, and the selves of the prophets, وَمَا يَتَّبِعَ ذَلِكَ, and what follows that. Right? Is that clear? Clear so far about the fadluhu. What is the greatness of this science? Then he says, nisbatuhu. What is the relation of this science to other sciences? Right? أنه أصل العلوم وما سواه فرع. He says that it is the origin of all the other sciences, and all that is other than it is a branch. Right? Aqida is the origin of all other sciences. Whether it's fiqh, whether it's tafsir. Right? Aqida is the origin of all other sciences, and every other science is a branch of this science. Right? Because, like I said, why do we study fiqh? Because we believe La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, and we believe from that we've been ordered to pray. So it goes back to Aqeedah. Why do you study tafsir? Because you believe this is a book that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed and you want to understand it. So it goes back to Aqeedah. Yes.
So when it says the origin of all sciences, does that include like non-Islamic sciences like physics?
Yes, because how do we understand physics? From our Aqeedah. Right? We're going to talk about that. How do we understand the cause and the effect relationships in the world? This goes back to our Aqeedah. We as Muslims have a different viewpoint about cause and effect compared to the kafir. Right? So because of that, for a Muslim, yes, all these other sciences will go back to it. When you study chemia and physics and all these other things, chemistry and physics, for us, it goes back to Aqeedah because we believe differently how the kuffar believe in these things. Right?
What was the definition of nisba again?
Nisba is a relation. What is the relation of this science to the other science? We say this science is the origin of all other sciences, and all other sciences are branches of it. So this science is the origin, the others are branches. Right? Or the base. Tamam. Wadi'uhu. Wadi'uhu means the founder. Who is the founder of this science? Right? Because every science has a founder or a main individual who is attributed with codifying this science and making it in a way where we could study it and learn it and preserve it. Right? For example, in the science of Nahu, who do they usually say is the founder of the science of Nahu?
Sibawayh.
Abu Aswad al-Du'ali, who was commanded by Sayyidina Ali to undertake preserving this science or codifying this science. Right? So sometimes they might say it's Sayyidina Ali, because he gave the order, because the Prophet ﷺ said, Ad-da'ilu al-khayr ka-fa'ili, right? The one who points to good is like the one who does it. So sometimes they might say Sayyidina Ali, sometimes they might say Abu Aswad Du'ali because he's the one who codified the rules of the Arabic language.
Do we still have that book?
Which one?
The one that you wrote.
I don't know. We have Al-Kitab by Imam Sibawayh. But Imam Sibawayh wasn't the founder of Nahu. Right? But he was one of the great scholars of the science. So the Wadiyah, who is the founder? First, Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, وَمَنْ تَبِعَهُ وَأَبُو مَنْصُورِ الْمَاتُرِيدِي وَمَنْ تَبِعَهُ. Right? So we have technically two founders of this science. We have the first Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, وهو علي ibn Ismail al-Mutawaffa sana 324 after Hijrah. Right? And we have Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, وهو Muhammad ibn Muhammad sana 333 after Hijrah. And Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, he is a descendant of which companion?
Abu Musa.
Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, he is a descendant of which companion? Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. Both of them are descendants of the Sahaba. Right? And two great Sahaba. We know Sayyidina Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, he's the one the Prophet ﷺ stayed with when the Prophet ﷺ arrived in Medina. Right?
Didn't he split with Sayyidina Ali?
I'm not sure. I know that he stayed over the house of Sayyidina Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. So, when we say that Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi radiyallahu anhuma, they're the founders of this science, does that mean they invented Islamic Aqida? Does that mean that there was no correct Aqida before them? No. What do we mean by whether they're the founders of this science? It's very simple. Before them, there were scholars who wrote books on Aqida. For example, Imam al-Tahawi, who we covered. Imam al-Tahawi was before these two great Imams. And he wrote a work on Aqida, that what you have to believe as a Muslim, right? And before him, there were other scholars who wrote or gave speeches explaining what we as Muslims believe about Aqida. But what did these two Imams do? Is that they took the knowledge of Aqida that was explained by the previous Imams and made it into a codified school where we could address new issues, where we could codify the issues we already know, where we could teach it to people who want to learn it, and where we could preserve it from contamination, right? Because as you know, as the Muslims' empire starts to grow, or the caliphate starts to grow, it starts encountering different religions, different beliefs, different ideologies. They start encountering more Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, Zoroastrians, other people of other ideologies, other belief systems, right? Jews. So as the Islamic empire is growing, they start encountering more and more different religions. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is, not the majority of the ummah, of course, not the majority, because the majority is divinely protected. But some people start to get affected by these ideologies. For example, we're going to talk about the Mu'tazila. Who were the Mu'tazila affected by? They were affected by Greek philosophical thought, right? Because who were the first people to translate the Greek works? It wasn't the Romans and Europeans, it was the Muslims. The Muslims translated the ancient Greek works, and unfortunately some people, when they were translated, or as they were translating them, they started getting affected by their ideas, right? Of course, the majority of the ummah is protected, as is the promise that the Prophet ﷺ was given ﷺ by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the majority is protected, but that doesn't mean that some people won't deviate. So why is it that Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, they codified the Islamic Aqida so that we could protect it from being influenced by outside things, so we could systematize it in a way that it could be taught very effectively and memorized, and so that whatever the scholars of the past said, we could have it as a reference for us now in the school that we're going to establish. So when I say that Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi radiyallahu anhuma, they are the founders of the science of Aqida, it doesn't mean that they invented correct Aqida. No, correct Aqida was all the way from the time of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, the first prophet alayhi salam. But in our ummah, who preserved it in a way where it can be preserved and taught and codified and systematized, and books could be written on it, and we could teach it, and we could refute people who tried to attack our Aqida, it was those two Imams who undertook this work, right?
It's similar to how you could say Imam Shafi'i wrote down, like, he got like usul fiqh started with his book that he said.
Yeah. Because he says also وَمَنْ تَبِعَهُ, and those who follow him, right? Like any madhab, don't think like yes, the madhab will be named after one person, but there's other ulama in that madhab, right? Like Imam Hassan Ash'ari, we have Imam Baqillani, right? We have in the Maturidi madhab, we have Imam An-Nasafi, right? So yes, there are other imams who are also instrumental in codifying and preserving these schools, right? Is that clear? Tamam. Then he says, Ismuhu. What is the name of this science? Okay, we call it Aqida, but does it have a name in the categories of the different Islamic sciences? Is there a name for it? We can call it many names, but we can call it Ilm al-Tawheed, the knowledge of Tawheed. We can also call it وَسُمِّيَ عِلْمُ الْكَلَامِ. Ilm al-Kalam. Now, when people hear Ilm al-Kalam, they get triggered, some people, when they hear the word Ilm al-Kalam. Right? But why was the science of Aqeedah called Ilm al-Kalam? Kalam, we know, means speech. Right? Kalam, when I say Kalam, it means speech. So when I say Ilm al-Kalam, the science of Kalam, why would someone call it Ilm al-Kalam? There's different theories. Why Ilm al-Tawheed, or the science of Aqeedah, was later called Ilm al-Kalam. قيل إنه سمي بذلك لكثرة الكلام في مناظرات التي تجري في مسألة. Right? Some scholars say that why was it called Ilm al-Kalam is because of the vast amounts of discussion that were taking place in the science of Aqeedah. Right? One person speaking, one person speaking, one person speaking. There was a lot of different discussions in the debates around the science of Aqeedah. Right? And some scholars say it was called Ilm al-Kalam because you could say the most talked about discussion in the science of Ilm al-Kalam related to Allah's attribute of speech. What we call Kalamullah. So because there was so much discussion about this particular attribute, it became known as Ilm al-Kalam. Right? So we can call it Ilm al-Tawheed, Ilm al-Aqeedah, Ilm al-Aqaid. We can call it Ilm al-Kalam. Right? وقيل إن صفة الكلام لما كثر الخلاف فيها نسب هذا الفن إليها. تمام. Same thing we said, right? So why was it called Ilm al-Kalam? Either because of so much discussion that was happening in the science of Aqeedah, or because there was so much discussion that different people had about Allah's attribute of speech, which we're going to talk about, right? Allah's attribute of speech, which is eternal, everlasting, and not letters or sound. Tamam. وَاسْتِمْدَادُهُ, right? What istimdaduhu means, where do we get our proofs or our sources for the science? Right? Where are our sources for the science? Right? Where are we taking our information from? Where are we taking our proofs from the science? Right? He says, من الأدلة العقلية والنقلية, from the scriptural and intellectual proofs. Right? Where do we take our knowledge of Aqeedah from? Where do we extract Aqeedah from? Or what are we using when we talk about Aqeedah? We're using scriptural and mental proofs. Right? And someone might ask, can you use the intellect, the aql, the mental proofs in Aqeedah? We say yes, you can. Why? Because when you want to debate an atheist or a Christian or any kafir who doesn't believe in the Quran and Sunnah, he's not going to be convinced by your scriptural proofs. If you want to debate an atheist and you want to convince him of the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if he tells you, give me a proof that Allah exists, and you say it's mentioned in the Quran, he's going to say to you that he doesn't believe in the Quran, unfortunately. So now if you work like this, you're stuck. But what you can do is you can use, because he has an intellect and you have an intellect, he has a brain and you have a brain, you can use intellectual proofs to convince him why you believe in La ilaha illallah. Right? So when people say, oh, we don't use the intellect in defending Islamic belief, if this is what you believe, the atheist already won. If you say this, if you say we can't use intellect in Aqeedah, then the Christians and Jews and the atheists and all these other people, you let them win. You let them win. They've won. In da'wah, you've already given up. Because when you want to go give da'wah and convince them why to become Muslim, at that particular point you can't. Unless they want to hear what the Quran says, they're going to need a mental proof for what you're saying. If somebody doesn't believe in the existence of the Creator, you need to use a mental proof why you believe in the existence of the Creator. If somebody doesn't believe in the messengership of our Prophet ﷺ, you need to be able to prove intellectually why you must admit or must affirm or must confirm that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is a prophet. Yes.
So you mentioned like for non-Muslims to use like intellect, but so what about like a Muslim that believes in the Quran but is like misguided? Would you still?
Yes. So at that point, you can use verses from the Quran and Sunnah because he says he affirms the Quran. What I'm talking about is, let's say you want to give someone da'wah who doesn't believe in the Quran, doesn't believe in the naql, the scripture, we say, right? You can't use the naql, the scripture, Quran and Hadith, because he doesn't believe in it yet. If he is a Muslim already and says, I believe in the Quran and the Hadith, then at that point you can use ayat of the Quran and Hadith to show him why he's wrong. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But we're talking about, let's say you're debating someone who's not a Muslim. He wants to be convinced of Islam. And if you tell him the proof that Allah exists is that mentioned in the Quran, he might tell you he doesn't believe yet. So you need to be able to use your intellect to prove to him why La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah is the truth. Right? So in Islam, we use scriptural and intellectual proofs for our Aqida. Right? We use scriptural and intellectual proofs for our Aqida. We use them both hand in hand. Is that clear? Tamam. الأدلة النقلية كالآيات القرآنية وهي كقوله تعالى إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار والآية وقوله عز وجل سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم. Right? So what is a naqli proof? Because remember, there's a lot of technical terms in Aqida. We're gonna have to memorize them. We're gonna make a list. We're going to share in the group. This is what naqli means. This is what a naqli proof is. This is what naql means. What is a naqli proof? Are ayat from the Quran. If somebody says, prove to me that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is powerful from the Quran, I will say, Wallahu ala kulli shayin qadir. Right? If somebody says to me, prove that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is knowledgeable from the Quran, I will say, wa huwa bi kulli shayin alim. Surah Al-Hadid. Right? This is what we call, what kind of proof? Naqli proof. If somebody wants a aqli proof, what does that mean? An intellectual proof. If somebody says to me, give me the intellectual proof that Allah has power, I will say to him, it is necessary that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the attribute of power, because if he didn't, he would be powerless. And anything powerless cannot create. And because we know this universe is created, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the attribute of power by which he creates. Right? That's a naqli proof. I didn't quote an ayah of the Quran or Hadith yet. I'm only using the intellect, so it's called what? Aqli proof. Right? Did I say naqli? Yeah. My mistake. It's an aqli proof. So it's a naqli proof if we're using scripture. It's an aqli proof if we're using intellect. Right? Hukm al-shari' fihi. Hukm al-shari' fihi. What is the ruling of the sharia about aqidah? So some sciences, there might be a question. Does every Muslim have to learn nahu? Does every Muslim have to learn tajweed? Does every Muslim have to learn fiqh? What is the ruling on this science? Right? We say al-wujub al-ayni ala kulli mukallafin dhakaran kana wa untha. What is the ruling on aqidah? It is personally obligatory upon every accountable person, whether they are male or female. So does this mean that you can skip learning Aqeedah as a Muslim? Never. Just in the same way you can never skip learning how to pray as a Muslim, you can never skip learning Aqeedah as a Muslim either. Right? Now, there's two types of Aqeedah, or two levels of Aqeedah. There's the Aqeedah level which is obligatory upon every Muslim to learn, and there's Aqeedah level which is only obligatory upon scholars to learn, or scholars who are going to specialize in that science. The same way with fiqh. In fiqh, as a person who follows a madhab, are you obligated to learn all the proofs for what your madhab says? No. But you are obligated to learn how to pray. So in fiqh, there's going to be a level that's obligatory for you. Once you reach that level, you're excused and you're no longer sinful. And if you want to learn more, then that's more reward, and that's great, but that's usually for the scholars. In the same way, Aqeedah, we have a certain level. Once you learn that much, you're excused. You're no longer sinful. But if you want to do more, then that's because you want to specify in the science, or you want to be someone who can defend the Islamic creed against those who try to attempt to disprove it. Is that clear? تمام. So he says, الوجوب العيني على كل مكلف ذكر كان أنثى. It is personally obligatory. What is the ruling of Aqida in the Sharia? It is personally obligatory upon every accountable person, whether they are male or female. تمام. مسائله. What are the topics or what are the cases we're going to discuss in Aqida? Right? Like I said, in Aqida, you're not going to ask me, is this halal or is this haram? Eating this or eating that. You're not going to ask me a fiqh question in Aqida. In the same way in fiqh, we don't ask Aqida questions in fiqh. But in the what are the cases or what are the questions we're going to talk about in the science of Aqida? He says, قضاياه الباحثة عن الواجبات والجائزات والمستحيلات. He says the cases that we discuss in Aqida is the researching or the understanding of the necessities, the possibilities, and the impossibilities. In other words, we're going to be discussing what are necessary, what are impossible, and what are possible in relation to our belief about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His prophets. We're always in the science of Aqida going to be saying this is mustahil, this is impossible, this is wajib, this is necessary, this is jaiz, this is possible. Right? Always in Aqida, this is what we're discussing. We're talking about things that are necessary, we're talking about things that are impossible, we're talking about things that are possible. Tamam? Is that clear?
Could you just repeat it?
So قضاياه الباحثة, he says what are the questions or the cases we're discussing in Aqida? He says its cases are regarding the wajibat, the necessities, the jaizat, the possibilities, and the mustahilat, the impossibilities. Right? Is that clear? Alright, let's take a 10-minute break. Is that okay? We'll take a 10-minute break. We'll be back here 8:17, 8:20ish. If you need to use the restroom, you need to, yeah.
Question or in the break or no?
I'm gonna go eat. So I was fasting. Just give me my 10 minutes and I'll get back. Unless it's like really, really, really pressing.
It's not pressing.
Okay, then let me eat and I'll come back.
Yeah.
Alright. So,
No rush. I love that smile. Habib is happy.
breaks before we start, after we start.
Okay.
Don't ask while, unless you're trying to understand what I said.
Okay.
Like,
if it's tangential, then
yeah, like you're only asking to understand what the book is saying.
yeah.
So if I'm talking about the wajibat, and you ask me, what's the most severe punishment of adab al-qabr? You're asking an aqeedah question in a way, but it's not related to the book. So go ahead.
The question is, the last point was about the masail,
Yeah.
about al-aqeedah, and it said, قضاياه الباحثة عن الواجبات والجائزات والمستحيلات.
Yes.
But beforehand, in the part about موضوع, like مجال البحث, it also mentioned like these things that were mentioned in the masail and the sam'iyat. So why were the sam'iyat not mentioned in the masail? Because the sam'iyat are like masail, right?
Yeah, but the sam'iyat, they fall under jaizat. So if we're talking
okay.
about sam'iyat, we will be talking about jaizat too.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yes.
So I still have the same question about al-had. I'm not able to understand what are they trying to define, like in the sense, what is it connected to? I'm just confused in this part. Like I understand what the al-had means, like, and what lugha, like the linguistic definition, that which is the lugha. I'm having a hard time understanding what are they both connecting to.
So, like I said, had in this context means definition, right? So here he is giving you what is the definition of tawheed, right?
Okay.
He's telling you what is the definition of tawheed. But when I give you a definition of a word, traditionally the scholars will give you a linguistic and a technical definition, because both the linguistic and the technical definitions are interrelated.
Okay.
Right? Like even if you open up a book of fiqh, they'll tell you what is siyam, lughatan al-imsak. That's how they started. They'll always tell you the linguistic definition followed by the technical definition because they're interrelated. And if you understand the linguistic definition of a word, you'll also understand the technical one because it's based off of that.
Okay. So what is al-had defining?
Had here is defining what is Tawheed, what is Aqida.
What is Aqida? Okay,
Yeah.
so Aqida, the technical definition of it is تعريف علم التوحيد.
Or here, al-had, yani, what is had here? We're talking about ilm al-tawheed. So what is tawheed? What is tawheed? We have to understand this word. If somebody tells you, I'm going to go study ilm al-tawheed, they're going to ask you, define for me what is tawheed.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? That's why he said al-had, and then he mentioned what is tawheed, linguistically and technically. Because aqidah is also called ilm al-tawheed.
Okay.
So if I'm going to tell you, okay, we're going to study aqidah, also known as ilm al-tawheed. The first thing you're going to ask me is, what is tawheed? Define for me what is tawheed.
So is he changing like ilm al-tawheed and Aqida interchangeably?
You can use them interchangeably because ilm al-aqidah has different names. It's sometimes called ilm al-usul al-din. Sometimes it's called ilm al-tawheed. Sometimes it's called ilm al-aqidah. Sometimes it's called ilm al-aqad. Sometimes it's called ilm al-kalam. Right? So, or imaniyat. So the aqidah itself, the science of aqidah itself has different names, several names. And this is permissible in the science.
Okay.
Right. Is that still ambiguous?
It's not clicking. I will sleep on it.
Okay.
And I sleep.
Let me know what you find in your sleep. Alright. Alright, now we're on, if you have the PDF, we're on page 20 of the PDF. Aqsam al-Hukm. Now, before we get into Aqidah, like we said, there's certain judgments and certain things we have to understand. Right? Because like I said, in the science of Aqidah, now that we're going to more, intermediate books, we're going to be using terms that we didn't use in Aqidah Tahawiyya necessarily. Aqidah Tahawiyya just told you what you have to believe. Here, we're going to tell you what you have to believe and why. And when you explain why, you're going to be using terms to explain why. Right? Aqsam al-Hukm. What does Aqsam al-Hukm mean? It means the divisions or the types of judgments. Right? The types of judgments. He says, ينقسم الحكم إلى ثلاثة أقسام. شرعي وعادي وعقلي. شرعي وعادي وعقلي. He's saying that the judgments or the judgment of a thing divides into three types. One is called shari'i, one is called adi, and what is called aqli. And we're going to discuss each one. So what do we understand from this? You can have a judgment that is aqli, shari'i, or adi. Right? I can say, what is the judgment of this? Aqlan, intellectually. What is the judgment of this? Shar'an, religiously. What is the judgment of this? Adatan, habitually, or customarily. Right? Yes.
So they're not mutually exclusive categories.
They're exclusive, but in a way they're also related.
Okay.
Right? We'll talk about that later on. But right now, just understand there's three types of judgments we have. Shari'i, Adi, and Aqli. And we're going to talk about what each one means. He says, فالشرعي يأتي في فن الأصول. Right? وقد قالوا في تعريفه هو خطاب الله المتعلق بأفعال المكلفين. Alright. So, when we say something is, what is the shari'i definition? Where do we learn about this? We learn about this in the science of usul. Right? What are the legal judgments? You learn in usul. What is fard? What is wajib? What is haram? What is makruh? What is mubah? Right? If you take Hanafi usul, you'll learn what is fard, what is wajib, what is sunnah mu'akkida, what is sunnah ghair mu'akkida, what is makruh tahrimi, makruh tanzihi, what is haram. Right? So when we talk about the hukm al-shar'i, the religious judgment, we're not talking about that in Aqidah necessarily. Sometimes we'll talk about it. But usually you want to learn the religious judgment, which science are you going to go to? Usul al-fiqh. How do we define something as fard? What is the definition of fard? And what actions are defined as fard? How do we characterize certain actions as fard? Right? Is that clear? What hukm al-shar'i is? The religious judgments. Where do we get the religious judgments from? We get them in the science of usul. That's another discussion. But sometimes in Aqidah we mention it, so that's why he's mentioning it here. Then he says, wal-adi. What is adi? Meaning the customary or the habitual judgment. Right? Adi, even ammiya, we say, oh, this is adi, it means this is normal, this is the habitual thing. Right? So he says, وَالْعَادِي هو إثبات أمر لأمر أو نفيه عنه بواسطة التكرار. What is something حكم العادي? It is the affirmation of something to something or negating it by means of repetition. In other words, how do I know something is the habit or the habitual thing? Whether I'm negating, whether I am affirming it or negating it. For example, habitually or normally, when I take water and I pour it onto fire, what happens?
Put out the fire.
Puts out the fire. Now, how do you know that this, how would you make a judgment saying this is the norm? Because every time you take water and you put it on fire, the fire goes out. Right? So you know this is the habit, this is the norm. If you take water and pour it on fire, fire goes out. Right? Or what is usually associated with fire is burning. That when there's fire, there's going to be burning. Right? Habitually, normally, every time I see fire, I see burning. Right? So the hukm al-adi, هو إثبات الأمر لأمر, is affirming an affair to another affair or something to something, or نفيه, or negating it, نفي عنه, or negating it from it, بواسطة التكرار. So how can I say this is the norm, this is the habit? Because I see it happening again and again and again and again and again. We see it in the world, we see it in the universe, something is happening again and again and again. Right? كالحكم على الملح الإنجليزي بأنه مسهل. Right? So for example, here they're mentioning something called English salt. الملح الإنجليزي. He's saying that, such as the judgments upon the ملح الإنجليزي, the English salt, بأنه مسهل. Or مسهل, that is a laxative. So if I take a laxative, what's the habitual norm that happens when you take a laxative?
You go to the bathroom.
You're gonna go to the bathroom. So whether you call it laxative or English salt, you know the norm is every time I take this, I have to go to the bathroom. I take it, I have to go to the bathroom. I have to go to the bathroom. So what two things do you connect? If I take this, what do you call it? English salt or laxative, what's going to happen? What's the result that will happen after that? You have to go to the bathroom. Right? This is a hukm al-adi, a habitual judgment. If I take this, this is going to happen. How do I know that? Because it's repetitive experience. Right? Yes.
So clarification on that. So here, hukm adi, in the sense of habit, means that like the sun will rise from the west every day. That's like in that sense. So
that's the habit. That's the norm
right.
that continues happens. How do we know that? Because of repetition.
Right. But not in the sense of me saying like, when I drive, I usually don't crash. But like, I can crash and get into an accident.
Yes, but now you're going to something else we're going to talk later.
Right. But
just about hukm al-adi.
Right.
What is hukm al-adi? You're making a judgment as something being a norm based on the repetitive cycle you see.
But like a certain norm, like a norm that is like certain all the time, not like I usually don't crash. Right? That's what I'm saying.
No. Hukm al-adi is, like, let's say I have the laxative and I have the diarrhea.
Yeah.
Okay? My judgments, my hukm al-adi is that if I take this laxative, I'm going to have diarrhea. Why? Because based on takrar, based on repetition, every time I take it, it happens. I take it, it happens. I take it, it happens. We're not talking about hypotheticals. We're just talking about when I take this, what I usually, what's the norm that happens based on repetition is that I go to the bathroom.
Right.
You understand? I'm not talking about, oh, maybe I take it and it doesn't happen. No, right now, we're talking about what is the habit, what is the norm, what is the custom. If I take this, this happens.
Okay.
If I do this, this happens. If this happens, this happens. Right? Is that clear?
Or like if an apple falls, if an apple falls from the tree, it's gonna go to the ground. It's not gonna.
Yes,
fly.
that's the norm you see.
Yeah.
Right? That if I shake the apple tree, an apple will fall. That's the norm. I've tried it so many times, and each time it happens.
Yeah.
Not that I've done it, but
yeah.
let's say if you
I
did
see
it.
what you
Right?
mean, yeah. Okay.
So what is hukm al-adi? It's a habitual judgment of establishing a thing to a thing or negating it from another thing based on takrar, repetition. I take English. I take a. Why do I keep forgetting this word?
English
Laxative.
Laxative, and I get diarrhea. That's a hukm al-adi. If you take a laxative, you're gonna get diarrhea. Right?
Could you say it's inductive knowledge?
I don't know. I'm just telling you what the book says. It's حكم العادي. All right. وعلى الأسبرين بأنه مسكن. And that another حكم العادي is when you take aspirin, what happens? It grants you relief or ease, right? So my حكم العادي is based on repetition. If I take aspirin, what's going to happen? You're going to have relief and ease, right? Your migraine, your fever, whatever is going to go down. How do I know this? Because every time I take aspirin, I see that I get relief, right? So this is what? حكم العادي, habitual judgment. وعلى النار بأنها محرقة. And upon fire, that it burns. In the sense that every time I see fire, every time I experience fire, I experiencing burn. I have a burn, or I see it burn. So what is my حكم العادي? My habitual judgments. If there's fire, then what's going to come? What's consequently going to come after that? Burning, right? Is that clear? So what is حكم العادي? You're affirming a thing to something or negating it from it based on takrar, based on repetition. You take a laxative, you're going to have diarrhea. You see a fire, there's going to be some burning. وعلى الطعام بأنه مشبع. And that food leads to satiation. What's my حكم العادي? I notice every time I eat food, I experience satiation, right? وغير ذلك, and other than that, right? وفيه أربع مذاهب. Now, in relation to حكم العادي, there's 4 different schools. In relation to حكم العادي, how do we understand the habitual judgment? The حكم العادي, there's 4 different schools. مذهب الطبيعيين طبيعيين ومذهب العقليين ومذهب المعتزلة ومذهب أهل السنة. Alright. The madhab of the طبيعيين are who we call the naturalists, right? The naturalists are people who, in other words, believe what they call Mother Nature is what is creating, or what they call Mother Nature is what is affecting, right? In other words, they believe that things in and of themselves affect, right? We're going to talk about what they believe. يقول الطبيعيون, right? This word is hard for me to say. يقول الطبيعيون إن تسكين الأعصاب من طبيعة الأسبرين. They say that the relaxation of the nerves is from the nature of aspirin. وكذلك سائر العقاقير المفيدة في دفع الأمراض الخاصة. And likewise, the other drugs that are beneficial in, let's say, removing sickness, specific illnesses. فإنها عندهم من طبيعتها أي بدون مؤثر. So what are they saying? They're saying that, for example, when you take aspirin, they're saying that by itself, or its nature is that it'll grant you relief. Or they're saying if you're sick and you take a specific drug, they're saying the nature of that drug, or by itself, is that it will heal you. بدون مؤثر, they say, without an effector, right? Meaning they're saying that it happens in and of itself. وكذلك الحكم على النار بالإحراق. And likewise their judgment of the fire in relation to burning. وغير ذلك. وإن من يعتقد هذا المذهب كافر بإجماع المسلمين. And whoever believes this, adopts this madhab, then in the consensus of all Muslims, they are kuffar. In other words, if somebody believes that something in and of itself, by itself, affects, then this is kufr, right? So for example, if somebody believes that medicine by itself, without the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if they believe that medicine by itself independently heals and cures, then this is kufr. If they believe that water in and of itself, by itself, if they claim that it grows crops by itself, in and of itself, then this is kufr, right? Why? Who can explain to me why? Why, if you're a naturalist, you would be? This is what. Of course, we affirm the judgment, but why? If someone was to ask, why is a naturalist outside the fold of Islam? Yes.
Because they don't believe in Allah's will, too, I guess.
Yes, so they believe things are acting independent of Allah's will. In other words, and we said nothing can happen without the will of Allah. Because if something happened without the will of Allah, then you're saying that things are happening in His kingdom without His will. And that shows weakness and deficiency. What else? Yes?
I was going to ask a question, but it was because they're associating partners with Allah, right?
Yes. So if you say that these things are independent of Allah in the way they affect other things, then what you're saying is that Allah has rivals, wa'adhu billah. Right? So do you understand why, if someone was to believe that things, or if a person adopts a naturalist mindset, they believe that medicine cures by itself, or fire burns by itself, or water grows crops by itself, if they adopted that, why it would take them outside the fold of Islam? Because either they're saying that things are acting independently of Allah's will, escaping Allah's will, which is impossible, or they're associating partners with Allah in that they believe something can act independently. Is that clear? So the first group the Shaykh is warning against when it comes to hukm al-adi are the naturalists. So as Muslims, we should not be saying things like, oh, Mother Nature. This is what the kuffar say. The kuffar say Mother Nature. They say Mother Nature causes the storm. Nature does not have a will, does not have knowledge, does not have power. So how can it affect anything else? Right? Nature doesn't have a will of its own, doesn't have knowledge, doesn't have power, doesn't have a life. So how can it independently affect anything? Yes.
So when we're bringing up these three ahkam, we say that each and everything has one of these three ahkam, has shar'i and aqli and adi. They're not exclusive.
No, right now, I just want you to understand the definitions.
Yeah.
What do I mean by hukm al-adi? We'll talk about how something might have hukm al-aqli or hukm al-shar'i. Right? We'll talk about how something might have hukm al-aqli. We'll talk about that, yes, but a thing can have different judgments depending on what you're talking about. So let's say I'm talking about one specific thing. Intellectually, it might have a different judgment. Religiously, it might have a different judgment. Or adatan, it might have a different judgment. But right now, we're not going to get to that. We'll get to that when we move on. But right now, I just want you to understand what is hukm al-adi. Hukm al-shar'i, you know, it's the religious judgment, and you get that in usul al-fiqh. Hukm al-adi is what we judge based on repetition of things happening. And now the Shaykh is saying there's four groups who have different ideologies in this, right? He says first the naturalists, by the consensus of the Muslims, they are kuffar. So somebody believes that something affects by itself independent of the will of Allah, then this is without a doubt kuffar. Then he says madhab al-aqliyyin, right? The madhab of the rationalists, right? أما العقليون, right? فإنهم يقولون إن تسكين الحاصل من الأسبرين والإحراق الحاصل من النار وغير ذلك إنما هو بخلق الله تعالى وقدرته ولكن بين النار والإحراق والملح الإنجليزي والتسهيل ملازمة عقلية لا يمكن انكفاكها. Okay, so now you have another group called the rationalists. What do they say? They say that the relief that comes with aspirin and the burning that comes with fire, and other than that, they say it is by the creating of Allah and His power. However, they said between fire and burning and English salt and diarrhea, for example, they say there is an intellectual inseparability, right, that cannot be undone. Do you understand what they said?
Undone by Allah, or
they said it's intellectually impossible to be undone.
Okay.
All right. So, for example, they would say that between the relationship between fire and burning, they'll say it's by the creating of Allah and by the power of Allah, but they say to separate fire and burning is intellectually impossible. That's what the rationalists will say. Do you understand what they're saying? Habib, you understand what they're saying? So, Habib, the rationalists will say the relationship between the cause and effect. For example, fire and burning, cause and effect, right? The rationalists will say, they won't say, okay, it's by themselves on their own. But what they're going to say is that the rationalists will say that the relationship between the cause and the effect, they say it's by Allah creating it and by His power, but they say it's impossible that relationship be separated. you understand now?
Yeah.
So the rationalists, they'll say, okay, the relationship between the cause and the effect, they'll say it's by the creating of Allah. They'll say that it's by His power, but they'll say it's impossible, intellectually impossible, they'd be separated from one another. In other words, they would say, what they're claiming is it's impossible that that burning be removed from fire.
Even by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
That's what they're saying, unfortunately. Because they're saying it's intellectually impossible. They'll say Allah creates it, but they're saying it's impossible it be removed.
But if,
They're saying it's aqli, like, yani, it's not possible at all. Right? Did I lose anyone?
So they deny miracles, like for example.
Well, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. What was Sheikh will literally answer this, right? But do you understand what the rationalists are saying?
yeah.
Once again, the rationalists are, this is wrong, but we're going to explain. The rationalists are saying, they're saying that the cause and the effect, let's say, take for example fire and burning, they say it's by the creating and by the power of Allah, but they say it's intellectually impossible for that relationship to be separated. So to them, fire and burning must be always 100% never ever change. They say it's intellectually impossible those two things be removed from one another. Is that clear? That's what they're saying. Not what we're saying, that's what they're saying. Is that clear? So he says, ومن يعتقد هذا فهو فاسق وربما جره إلى الكفر. Right? He's saying whoever believes this, what the rationalists believe, he's saying that such a person is a fasiq. What is a fasiq? Muslim but a major sinner. But he says, وَرُبَّمَا جَرُّهُ إِلَى الْكُفْرِ. But perhaps it could take him to kufr. So whoever adopts what the rationalists say, he's saying, okay, they're a fasiq, they're a Muslim major sinner, but it could lead him to kufr. Why? كأن ينكر معجزات الأنبياء. Because it could lead him to rejecting the miracles of the prophets. Right? والأخبار الواردة عن طريق القرآن والشرع من إرجاع هذا الجسم من ذراتها المتفرقة. And for example, the return of the body being remade from the particles after it was decomposed. Right? وَالطَّيْ السَّمَوَاتِ, the rolling up of the skies, the heavens. وَتَبْدِيلِ الْأَرْض, and replacing of the earth. وَدُنُوُ الشَّمْسِ مِنْ رُؤُوسِ الْخَلَائِقِ, and the sun coming close to the heads of the people. غَيْرُ ذَلِكَ مِمَّا يَكُونُ إِنْكَارُهُ كُفْرًا. And likewise other things that, if you were to reject them, they would be kufr. So what is he saying? He's saying that why is this dangerous, if you believe this? If you believe these relationships are inseparable, like the rationalists, they'll admit, they'll say it's by the creating of Allah, and by the power of Allah, but they'll say this relationship between the cause and effect is inseparable. Why is this dangerous? Because if you adopt this belief, then it's going to lead you to negate the miracles of the prophets and what is mentioned in the Quran. For example, what's going to happen on Yawm al-Qiyamah, these extraordinary things that will happen. And if you reject these things, right, the miracles of the prophets and what is mentioned in the Quran is going to happen on Yawm al-Qiyamah, this is kufr. So he's saying this is a dangerous to believe, right? It could lead someone to kufr.
Did they then reject the story of Sayyidina Ibrahim? Like about like the burning in the fire and like how the fire became cool?
If you took this opinion of the rationalists,
Right.
then you would be stuck if you heard the story of Sayyidina Ibrahim. Because according to you, fire and burning can never be separated.
Right.
But the Quran is telling you that it is separated. So if you affirm it, then you have to affirm that it's not necessary that relationship always happen. Or if you reject it, then you've rejected what the Quran says, and this is kufr.
Right.
That's why the Shaykh is saying this is dangerous to believe. Because even though you're admitting that it's by the power and by the creating of Allah Azza wa Jal, still it could lead you to kufr. Why? Because it could lead you to rejecting the miracles of the prophets.
Right.
Is that clear with the rationalists? Remember, they're wrong, but we're just telling you what they believe. Yes?
So are they essentially saying like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can create properties of matters, but He cannot modify it again?
According to them, they're saying it's intellectually impossible for that cause and reflect relationship to be separated. So in other words, what they're saying is, A'udhu Billah, but they're not saying this explicitly. But if you say that, if you say, for example, that fire and burning can never be separated from one another, then what you're saying is that even though you might not be saying explicitly, we say بالقول وبالفعل. Even though you're not saying it verbally, what you're saying is that what you're believing is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not doing that or cannot do that. Right? Even though they're not explicitly saying it like that, he's saying if you adopt this position, it will lead you to that. Because you're going to reach a point where you hear the miracles of the prophets, and if you hear the miracles of the prophets, it's gonna go against what you believe that these two things are inseparable and can never be undone. Right? So that's why he's saying, even if you adopt this, and it doesn't take you to kufr right away, it could take you to kufr, because when you hear about the miracles of the prophets and you don't affirm them, or you reject them, then you're going to fall out of Islam, because you rejected what the Quran says. Does that answer your question?
I mean, this position seems so dumb. Like,
Huh?
like it's neither here nor there. Like
that's why we say everybody outside of the Sunnah wal Jama'ah is dumb. Is that clear? Alright, next he says Madhab al-Mu'tazila. The Madhab of the Mu'tazila. He says ويرى المعتزلة أن الملازمة بين النار والإحراق وغيرها هي ملازمة عادية. Okay, so now the Mu'tazila, how are they different? They say that the relationship between, for example, fire and burning and the others, they say it's a mulazima, inseparability, that is adi, customary, right? So they're not saying it's intellectually impossible for fire and burning to be separated, but they're saying its inseparability is customary, not always happens, right? وهذه التأثيرات الحاصلة من هذه المؤثرات بقوة جعله الله بها ومعتقد هذا المذهب مبتدع. Okay, what do they say though? They say that the Mu'tazila believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places in the cause a power which leads to the effect. In other words, they believe that, for example, fire, the Mu'tazila will say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts in fire a power, a deposited power, which leads to the effect of burning. That's what the Mu'tazila say. The Sheikh says whoever believes this, then he's a mubtada, he's an innovator. He says not kufr, but he's not from the fold of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Because we're going to explain the position of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah after this. Right? So the Mu'tazila believe in deposited power. They believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deposited power in the cause, and then that, because of that deposited power, it leads to the effect. That's wrong. We're going to explain why. Yes. Get your hand up?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh no.
I'm sorry. Is that everybody understand what the Mu'tazila believe? We're not agreeing with them. We're just explaining what they believe. Madhab Ahl Sunnah. The madhab of Ahl Sunnah. أما أهل السنة فيعتقدون أن بين هذه الأسباب والمسبباتها ملازمة عادية يخلقه الله عندها لا بها. Okay. The way of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, what do we believe? We believe that these causes and their effects, they have a mulazama, a relationship that is adiyya, that is customary, habitual, right? يخلقها الله عندها لا بها. That Allah creates at the time of it, but not in it. What does this mean? Fire and burning, cause and effect, right?
Yeah.
We say that, we don't believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a power in the fire that leads to the burning. No, we say Allah creates the fire, and at the time of fire, Allah creates the burning. So at the cause, Allah creates the effect. At the cause, Allah creates the effect. When there's fire, Allah creates the burning. When there is drinking water, Allah creates the quenching of the thirst. When there's food, Allah creates the satiation. Right? Is that clear so far? So in other words, we believe both the cause and the effect are created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't believe the cause is making the effect, whether on its own or whether with a deposited power. On its own, the naturalists say that. With a deposited power, that's what the Mu'tazila say. We say both the cause and the effect are created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Is that clear so far?
No.
What? Yes.
Sorry, could you just repeat Aqida. So basically, to recap, we believe that the cause and effect are created independently, and they don't have a binding relationship on each other.
They don't have an intellectual binding relationship with each other. I don't say it's intellectually necessary that that burning comes after fire. I say it's a habitual custom that Allah creates at that time. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates burning at the presence of fire. With fire, of course, both the fire and the burning are created by Allah. Allah creates the fire, and with the presence of the fire, or at the presence of the fire, Allah creates burning. Allah creates water, and with the presence of the water, at the presence of the water going down, you drinking it, Allah creates the satiation. So we say both the cause and the effect are created by Allah. We don't say the cause creates the effect on its own, nor do we say the cause creates the effect with the power Allah gave it. No. Both the cause and the effect are both created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ويخلق الله هذه العادات إما معجزة للنبي أو كرامة للولي. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can make these norms break or go against how they usually are with a miracle of the Prophet or a karama of a wali. Right? What is a mu'jiza of a Prophet? It's an extraordinary event. It's not something that's habitual or normal, in the sense that something that we see every day. For example, when Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam threw down his staff and it became a serpent and it ate everything the magicians threw, this is something that is against the norm. Because when we throw down a staff, it doesn't turn into a snake. It's not the norm. It remains as a staff, right? But when a prophet when a miracle is performed with one of the noble prophets, then this is an extraordinary event. It's not the norm that we usually see. And likewise, the karama of a wali. The karama of a wali is also extraordinary, right? Like, for example, Sayyidah Maryam, she would have in her room where she was praying food, right? And the scholars say this food, in the summer it was the food of the winter, and in the winter it was the food of the summer. So it was out of season. When Sayyidina Zakaria, he saw this, he asked her where she got this from, and she said this is from Allah Azza wa Jal, right? So this is out of the norm. This is not the norm. So the norm is you get the summer fruit in the summertime and the winter fruit in the wintertime. But Sayyidina Maryam was getting the reverse. So this is a karama for Sayyidina Maryam. Yes.
Wait, when did you say the norms can be broken? Can you explain when you said the norms could be broken?
So the norms, we believe that these norms that we see, they're habitual norms that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made or creates. We believe they can be separated. Because we're talking about what is hukm al-adi, a hukm that we give, a habitual ruling we give based on repetition. We believe that cycle of repetition can be broken. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who created and originated this relationship. That when there's fire, there's burning. We believe, for example, someone might ask, could Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have created that every time there's fire, there's cool? There's a cool feeling? Yes. And that's how the world could have been. Every time we touch a fire, it's cool. But the scholars say the wisdom and the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that He made these things the norm. Why? Because if every day it was different, we wouldn't be able to handle it. We wouldn't be able to live. If every day, one day the fire is hot, one day the fire is cold. One day the water quenches your thirst, one day it makes you thirstier. One day the food makes you healthy, makes you full, one day it makes you more hungry. It would be very hard for us to live. So the scholars say by Allah's mercy, He made these things the norm so we could get used to them. So we wouldn't be, for example, confused and not know, is this going to lead to this or this going to lead to this? Is that clear?
But I guess my question is, when are the norms allowed to be erred?
Whenever Allah whatever Allah wills. If Allah wills for the norm to be broken, it will be broken.
Okay.
If Allah wills for the norm to happen, it will happen.
Okay.
Right? Like what happened with Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam and him trying to slaughter Sayyidina Ismail. The norm that Allah wills is that every time you pass a knife over someone's neck like this, it'll cut.
Yeah.
But when Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam passed the knife over Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salam, Allah willed for the knife not to cut. So the norm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates and wills is that the knife will cut. But this doesn't mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is bounded by the norm because He's the one who created that norm, willed for that norm to happen. If Allah wills for the norm to go not to happen, then it will not happen. Yes.
I guess to go off that question, when the Shaykh is saying here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can change the customary for mu'jizat of the prophets or for karama of the awliya, that's not exhaustive though, right? Because for example, like Dajjal will have miracles.
Yes, we're going to talk about that because khawarik al-adat, the breaking of the norm, there's different types.
Okay.
There's mu'jizat, there's karamat, there's istidraj, there's ma'una.
It's not exhaustive.
It's not exhaustive. There's more than the khawarik al-adat are not just limited to mu'jizat and karamat. There's different types, and the Imam will talk about this. But he's trying to tell you that there is khawarik al-adat. There is breaking of the norm, yes, or going against the norm.
I'm having a hard time. Like, what's the difference between like the Mu'tazila and Madhab Ahl Sunnah in terms of like their claims?
So the Mu'tazila say that Allah creates a power in the cause which leads to the effect. We Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah say no. Both the cause and the effect are created directly by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without an extra power. You get what I'm saying?
So the Mu'tazila is claiming that Allah Azza wa Jalla is not involved in the effect. It's just like He just like does the work with the cause and let the effect happen, but He's not necessarily involved in the effect.
That's what the Mu'tazila claim.
Okay.
So what would they say about the fire and Prophet Ibrahim?
They would say, well, that's how we address them. Because we would say, if you're saying that it has to happen like that, or it's inseparable, if you're saying that the fire, that's why the Mu'tazila, you will see they really deny a lot of the ghaybiyat. The Mu'tazila deny adab al-qabr. They deny that dua has an effect. They deny ru'ya. They deny a lot of things from the ghaib because they're stuck in affirming that there is an extra step that has to happen, where they claim that it's a deposit. They claim a deposited power. So you see, the Mu'tazila deny that sihr can have an effect. They deny jinn possession. Right.
What about like Prophet Yunus being swallowed by the whale and not being digested or something like that?
Yeah, that's what we would tell them. We would say, if you're saying this has a deposited power that must take place, then how do you explain these things? Right. So the Mu'tazila are like between the rationalists and they're like in between. Because I said they adopted things from the rationalists, from the Greek philosophers. Right. So if they say that there's a deposited power, then in other words, a'udhu billah, what they're saying is they're claiming Allah has to do a'udhu billah. They're claiming He has to do an extra step to affect something.
Or that He doesn't
a'udhu
have control of.
Or like we would say to them, why are you saying that? Why are you saying He has to create a deposited power? Why? Why are you saying a deposited power is necessary in the first place? Wallahu ala kulli shay'in qadir, right? Allah has power over all things. So why the need to create a deposited power in the cause to make the effect? Is that clear?
Yeah.
So Mu'tazila, like I said, if you're outside Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, you're stupid. No? No, really, you are. All right. So he says, okay. إلى ما سيأتي في بحث النبوات, as will be mentioned in the chapter about prophethood. فالنار ملازمة للإحراق ملازمة عادية. So the necessity of fire to burning is a habitual necessity. We don't say it's an intellectual necessity, that the mind cannot conceive of fire being separated from burning. We say it's a mulazama, inseparability that is habitual.
Mulazama adiyya.
Mulazama adiyya. So it's a habitual. I translate as inseparability. Mulazama, necessity. It's a habitual necessity, right? We don't say that it's an intellectual necessity. We're going to talk about that, right? We say by habit, the norm is that when there's fire, there's burning, and this is by the creating of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Okay. ويمكن, and it's possible, أن يخلق الله هذا الملازمة or هذه الملازمة. He's saying it is possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could make this relationship break or go against the norm. ويجعل النار باردا وسلاما كما فعل بسيدنا إبراهيم صلوات الله عليه, as he made the fire cool and peaceful and safe for Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. وهكذا في كل أمور, and likewise in all affairs. وإن من يعتقد هذا المذهب فهو المؤمن محقق لإيمانه. And whoever believes this, then this is a believer who is true in his iman. Right? So what is the creed of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah? We say both the cause and the effect are created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah wills for this relationship to happen, meaning that there's a fire and then there's going to be burning. This is by the creating and the will of Allah, right? If Allah wills for that not to happen, for the habit to be different, then it'll be different, right? Because the only reason that it's happening habitually like this is because that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills. When you touch fire, there's going to be burning. If you eat food, there's going to be satiation. That's what Allah wills to happen. But does that mean that Allah is bounded to only will this? No, Allah, if He wills, you could eat food and you could get even hungrier. Right? Yes.
So, when you look at the world like this, then what is the point of studying things like chemistry or physics or stuff like that? Because I guess you're just studying like the relationship or the habitual relationship.
Yeah, the hukm al-adi, yeah.
Okay.
What's your question?
I was just trying to understand like how do you.
So if you were a Muslim studying chemistry, we don't deny chemistry. But we're not saying that this chemical independently on its own is going to make this effect. We're going to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills that if you pour this chemical into here, this is what happens.
Okay.
That's what we believe. Right? We believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills if you take this chemical and mix it with this chemical, then this result is going to happen. But is it possible, intellectually, mentally possible, that you could make this experiment and then a different reaction could happen? It's possible. And even scientists will have to accept that. Right? Because sometimes you think, and this is proven in science, you do something, an experiment, assuming what's going to happen based on repetition, turns out totally different. Right? There's many science experiments like that, like the double slit. You guys heard of the double slit science experiment? When you look at particles, right? Like there's like a machine that would shoot particles through a slit. And a pattern would come out on the different side. Every time, pattern will come out. If you didn't look at the experiment. But if you look at the experiment, a different pattern comes out. The only variable that changed in the experiment was is someone looking at it or not. Right?
Right, it's the wave-particle duality.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So even in science, they have to admit, sometimes what you assume is going to be the effect, it doesn't happen the way you assume. So we say to them, so does this mean that this cause and effect relationship, what you're saying, is inseparable? They have to admit no, because this result just proved it. They are separable. They might not happen all the time, but are they separable? Yes. You can separate these two things. Yeah.
So then would we say that we study science to figure out what actually is adi and not, right? Because like what?
Yeah, you could. I mean, like we study medicine because we want to know. Okay, what is the adi? What is the norm? If I take this medicine, this is what happens.
Yeah.
Right. If I mix this chemical, then this is what happens. I want to know what is the custom or the habit between this and this. That's fine.
Yeah.
Right. That's what science is. You want to know what is the relationship or the custom. What is the norm that's going to happen between this and this. So we as Muslims, we can study science and medicine, this is fine. What we're saying is that these things do not independently by themselves create or affect. Right? That nothing can happen without the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah wills for this to happen. Allah wills for this habit to occur. Yes, this habit, this is usually what occurs. Why? Because this is what Allah wills. If Allah willed differently, it would be different. If Allah willed, we could pick up lava and eat it. But Allah wills, the will of Allah is, if there's lava, there's going to be burning. So we can't eat lava. Yes.
Unless Allah willed it.
If Allah willed, we could eat lava. Right? Any questions before we move on? Tamam. So he says, أما الحكم العقلي. Now, we covered the hukm that is shari'i, religious judgment. That's in usul al-fiqh. What is fard, what is haram. We talked about hukm al-adi, which is the habitual relationship between something based on repetition. If I see fire, I feel burning. Now we're going to talk about the intellectual judgments, meaning what the mind decides, what the mind rules. In other words, your aql, your intellect is the one who's making the judgment. Is that clear? أما الحكم العقلي فهو إثبات أمر لأمر أو نفيه عنه من غير التوقف على تكرار ولا وضع واضح. Right? In other words, as for حكم العقلي, the intellectual judgment, it is establishing something to something, or something from something, not based on repetition, and not based on the placement or legislation of something. In other words, it's not based on حكم العادي, and it's not based on حكم العقل. What is حكم? So حكم العقلي, it's not based on حكم العادي, it's not based on حكم الشرعي. It's not based on, let's see the relationship between the repetition of two things. It's not based on that, and it's not based on something declaring something as halal or haram or forbidden. حكم العقلي, you can say the judge in this case is the intellect. Right? And we all the time make intellectual judgments, right? Whether we realize it or not, we make intellectual judgments all the time. تمام. وهو أي الحكم العقلي ثلاثة أقسام. الواجب واجب مستحيل وجائز. And the حكم العقلي has three judgments. واجب, مستحيل, وجائز. Right? تمام. What is okay, so حكم العقلي, we said, divides into three types. واجب, we're going to define that as necessary. Mustahil, we're going to define that as impossible. Jaiz, we're going to define that as possible. So your mind, the intellect, makes three judgments: that something is necessary, something is impossible, and something is possible. Is that clear so far?
Wait, did you say the three terms?
First we have wajib, which is necessary. I'm going to stretch my feet out, you guys. Please don't take offense to that. It's just because my feet hurt. We have something that's wajib, which is necessary. Mustahil, which is impossible. And jaiz, which is possible. So the intellect makes three judgments. Necessary, wajib. Mustahil, impossible. And jaiz, meaning possible. Is that clear? Okay. Clear so far? Any questions? Because remember, now in Aqida, a lot of technical terms, lots of divisions. We have to understand them before we can move on. Is that clear? Yes. Don't be shy to ask. I'm not going to get mad. I want everybody to be at the same page. Understand everything before we move on. Go ahead.
You said حكم العقلي is not based on حكم العادي and حكم
Yes.
الشرعي.
In حكم العقلي, intellectual judgments, we're not using religious judgments, and we're also not using habitual judgments. حكم العادي, what is deciding the حكم is the aql. In حكم الشرعي, what is حكم الشرعي, what is making the judgment? The religion. In حكم العادي, what is making, you could say the judgment is the habit we see, the norm. In حكم العقلي, what is making the judgment? The intellect. Alright, and this divides into three. Wajib, mustahil, jaiz. Al-wajib, the first division of حكم العقل is al-wajib. وهو ما لا يتصور في العقل عدمه. Right? What is the definition of wajib? Intellectually necessary. Is that which the mind cannot conceive of its non-existence. In other words, your mind, your intellect judges this thing must be. Your intellect is saying what? This thing is wajib, this thing is necessary. It must be. And it cannot not be. In other words, your mind cannot conceive of the non-existence or the non-presence of this thing. Right? That's what wajib is. Wajib, necessary. So it's intellectually necessary, meaning your mind says this is necessary. It must be. Right? Its non-existence or its absence is no way. Right? وَيَكُونُ بَدَهِيًا وَنَظَرِيًا. And it's and this divides into two types. Badahi and Nadari. So wajib is two types. Badahi and Nadari. What is Badahi and Nadari? Badahi means you don't need to think about it. What do we call this in English? Something you don't need to think about. Intuitive or
Trivial.
trivial?
Yeah.
I would say intuitive.
Intuitive, yeah.
Intuitive?
Yeah.
Or is intuitive like a feeling?
'Cause intuition is something that you just know.
No, because intuition can be wrong.
Maybe instinct.
It can, or instinct.
Well, I guess
Instinctual.
Instinctive.
mathematically, not you could
Intuitive.
say trivial. Like
Wait,
it's,
is this the
mathematical
same
term.
as?
But a trivial result is something that
I
like
have my notes.
it's obvious
from
like when you just
Mantiq.
look at
Is
it.
this the same as
Absolutely,
Badi?
the Arabic terms.
Hmm?
What is it?
Is this the same as? So when we took Mantiq,
No, you want something.
we talked
Yes,
about
this is related to Mantiq.
Badihi and Nadri.
Yes.
So I can look at the definition we did.
What did you guys write in the... Because I understand badahi as you don't need to think about it. You know, but I don't know what the English word for that is.
You,
So,
if you look in the dictionary, just look up the word trivial and look at the math definition.
Here we go.
I'm telling you. Nafis probably knows what I'm talking about.
Badihi is self-evident.
self-evident. In other words, you don't need to think about it.
Yeah.
Right? I don't need to sit down, let me ponder, let me contemplate. No. Instantly you know the answer. Self-evident. Right? Jazakallahu khair.
And this isn't. So, the one we took in
Yeah.
Mantiq had a ya after the da.
Badahi?
Badihi.
Yeah, sometimes they say badahi, sometimes they say badihi.
Oh, so
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
They mean the same basically.
Okay.
Badahi or badihi, they're both mean the same thing.
Okay.
Alright. So something could be wajib, meaning the mind cannot conceive of its non-existence. Right? ما لا يتصرف العقل عدمه, that which the mind cannot conceive of its non-existence. ويكون بدهيا ونظريا. And it could be badahi, self-evidence, or nazari. Nazari means you need to think about it. So you think about it, and then the intellect concludes this is necessary. So the intellect could say, this is necessary, I don't need to think about it. And the intellect could say, this is necessary, but after I thought about it. Is that clear? So badahi means self-evident, you don't need to think about it. Nadari means you need to think about it.
Rational.
You need to rationalize a little bit, ponder it a little bit. Alright? As for example of something being wajib, badahi, he says, نحو قولك الجرم متحيز. What is the definition of a jirm? A jirm is basically a body that takes up space. متحيز means محلا من الفراغ, meaning taking up space from some type of emptiness. In other words, if somebody asks you, does a body take up space? What would you say?
Yes.
Yes. Do you need to be like, yeah, well, I really need to think about it, and give me a minute and I'll let you know? No, you're like, yeah, of course. Everything takes up space. Every body, right, that has mass takes up space. This takes up space. I take up space. This takes up space. This is something that badahi. I don't need to think about it. I affirm that it is wajib, necessary, that every body takes up space. Right? Every body takes up space. Right? Do I have to think about it and be like, I'm not really sure. I need to give me a minute. No. You know instantly. Is that clear? That's an example of something wajib badahi, that a body takes up space. Right? Something that is wajib nadari, Allahu mawjood, Allah exists. So, if you tell a person, does Allah exist? Right? They need to, does this come instantly to the person? They need to think about it. They think about it, and then they conclude, yes, it's necessary that Allah exists.
Well, some people
After thinking about it.
Some people would say yes instantly. I guess
Yes.
it depends on the person.
But that depends on but usually
But that usually means they thought about it already, right?
they thought about it already. So a person when we say it's nadari, it's not to belittle our belief about the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you you have all done this. You have looked at the creation, you've said, the planets, the stars, the moon, everything. You've made a deduction that there has to be that there must be a creator. So affirming the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is intellectually necessary by introspection, by thinking. Right? It came after you with some pondering, with some speculation, looking at the heavens and the earth. This affirmation of you happened. Is that clear?
So we would define it as thinking or pondering.
Nazar means to think. You're going to ponder. You're going to contemplate. Right?
Yeah.
Strictly from the intellectual point of view. You look, for example, even if it's a short, thinking. Like, okay, intellectually I know, I see this creation, therefore I know there's a creator. Even though that was short, still you needed to think. You made a deduction, right?
Yeah.
Whereas badahi, you don't need to think.
Like if someone asks you, are you sick? You know if you're sick or not.
You know if you're not, you know if you're sick or not. You can't be, well, let me think about it, right? Nadhari means you're going to have to you think about it a little bit. Whether it's, we're not saying you have to think about it for 20 years. No, we're saying you need to think and then it comes to you. Is that clear on the wajib? So what is wajib? That which the mind affirms must be. Your mind says this is necessary. For it not to happen is impossible. Your mind is saying this must be. Is that clear? Then the next category is al-mustahil, the impossible. وَهُوَ مَا لَا يَتَصَوَّرُ فِي الْعَقْلِ وُجُودُهُ. In other words, that which the mind cannot conceive of it existing. In other words, your mind says there's no way this could happen. Your mind is making a judgment. This thing is intellectually impossible. It cannot conceive of this thing occurring or existing. Right? And also, it could be badahi and nadhari. It could be self-evident without requiring thinking, or nadhari, it does require thinking. You declare something is impossible because of it's so clear and self-evident you don't have to think about it, or you declare something as impossible because you need to think about it after you thought about it, in other words, right? Al-badahi كخلو الجرم عن الحركة والسكون. For example, a body being neither moving or still. You know intellectually that every body, everything that takes up space is either moving or still. So if somebody says to you, can there be a body that takes up space that is neither moving or still? You're like, that's impossible. You don't even need to think about that. Right? Do you get what he's saying?
Yeah.
He's saying that somebody asks you, is it possible for there to be a body which takes up space, neither moving or still? Say, no way. The fact that you're like, wait, what? You know it's impossible, right? That's badahi. It doesn't require thinking. Nadhari, right? What is something impossible that requires you to think is if somebody said, does Allah have a partner? Speaking only intellectually. You would make a deduction. You would say it's impossible Allah have a partner, because if he had a partner, then he would be in need of that partner. And whatever needs is not God. Right? So if somebody asks, can Allah have a partner? You say this is impossible. But you make that declaration of it being impossible after thinking and after bringing evidences. Is that clear? Did I lose anyone?
No.
Alhamdulillah. Good? Alright. That's for the mustahil. The jaiz now is the possible. In other words, jaiz means it accepts the possibility of existing and also non-existing. It can exist and also can not exist. Your intellect says it's possible for this thing to exist. It's also possible for it to not exist. ما يصح في العقل وجوده وعدمه. That which is in the intellect sound to exist or not exist. ويكون بدهي ونظريا. And same thing. It can be بدهي or نظري. فالبدهي كالحركة للجسم. Right? For example, movement for a body. You ask someone, is it possible for a body to move? They'll say yes. You don't need to think about that. Is it possible for a ball to move? Say yeah, you can move a ball. Ball can accept movement. Or نظري, requiring you to think. كتعذيب المطيع الذي لم يعص الله قط. For example, somebody asks you, can a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who never ever disobeyed him, can he be punished in the hellfire? Forever?
Yes.
But this requires you to think. Right? This requires you to think a little bit on this question. Right? Because it doesn't come to you instantaneously. You have to think about what is the ruling on this. What is the ruling on this intellectually, religiously? Right?
Aren't they Asharis and Maturidis differ on this?
Yes, they differ on this. So the Ash'aris say, both the Ash'aris and Maturidis say, it is religiously impossible. Meaning, for a kafir to go to Jannah and for a mu'min to go to the hellfire, religiously this is impossible. Why? Because what does the religion tell us? Who goes where?
If you believe, you'll go to heaven.
If you're a believer, pious believer, go to Jannah. If you're a disbeliever, you will go to Jahannam. That's what the religion tells us. Religiously, they both say it's impossible. As for intellectually, can the mind conceive or imagine or accept a pious, righteous believer being punished in the hellfire forever and a kafir, an evil kafir, going to Jannah forever? Can the mind, what does the mind say about that? The Ash'ari say it's possible intellectually. The Maturidis say no. And both have their reasons. We'll get to that later. Right? Yes?
Are the differences like intellectually based or like based on logical proofs, or are they based on like scripture, naqlan, or
no, religiously they both agree.
Okay.
Religiously they both say the kafir is going to go to Jahannam forever, the believer is going to go to Jannah forever. Both agree it's religiously impossible for that to be reversed. Why? Because it's mentioned in the Quran what's going to happen. But somebody asks, if we didn't hear it from the Quran, let's say hypothetically, you didn't ever hear from the scripture who goes where, but this question was brought to you, then what judgment would you make? This will require you to think a little bit. That's why we're saying it's something jaiz, but it's nadari. You have to think about it. No? Alright. فإن هذا الجائز لم نحكم أنه جائز إلا بعد ما عرفنا أن الله هو المنفرد بالإيجاد الأشياء وإعدامها. He says, he's saying فهو الخالق للعبد وعمله فلا تأثير للفعل الطاعة والمعصية في الثواب والعقاب بل الثواب والعقاب ودخول الجنة بمحض اختيار الله فإذا يجوز عقلا أن يجعل علامة دخول النار الطاعة ولكن الذي أوجبه الشارع ولا يكون خلافه هو أن المعصية والكفر يكونان سببا لدخول النار وأن الإيمان والطاعة هو السبب في دخول الجنة والله أعلم. So the scholar is saying here about this question, is it possible for an obedient servant to go to the hellfire forever? He's saying intellectually this is possible. Why? Because if we didn't hear about it from the scripture, you could infer that whoever obeys will be punished and whoever disobeys will be rewarded. It's possible that couldn't. We're not saying that that's what happens. What we're saying is, let's say we didn't know from the scripture who goes where. Is it conceivable in the mind that if you were obedient, you could be punished? Yeah. Just from the mind. We're not talking about scripture. Is it conceivable that just from your mind, without hearing from the scripture yet, that if somebody disobeys, they could be rewarded? Can the mind conceive of this happening?
Yeah.
So that's what the scholar is saying. He's saying because فإن هذه الجائز لم نحكم أنه جائز إلا بعد ما عرفنا أنه because he said this possibility we do not judge it as a possibility after knowing that Allah is the only one with the power to create things and annihilate them. وهو الخالق للعبد وعمله, for he is the creator of the servant and his actions. فلا تأثير للفعل الطاعة والمعصية في الثواب والعقاب. So the actions of obedience or disobedience have no effect in reward or punishment. بل الثواب والعقاب ودخول الجنة بمخت اختيار الله. However, reward and punishment and entering Jannah and the hellfire are all by the will or the decision of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فإذا يجوز عقلا أن يجعل علامة دخول النار الطاعة. So it's intellectually possible that the sign of entering Jannah would be disobedience, right? أن يجعل علامة دخول النار الطاعة, or the sign of entering the fire could be obedience, right? ولكن الذي أوجبه الشارع ولا يكون خلافه هو أن المعصية والكفر يكونان سببا لدخول النار. However, the Sharia, right, the legal judgment, which there's no difference of opinion about, is that kufr and disobedience lead you to the fire, right? وَمَا الْإِيمَانُ وَالطَّاعَةُ هُمَا السَّبَبُ فِي دُخُولِ الْجَنَّةِ. And Iman and obedience, they are the reason you enter Jannah. So what we're saying is this. Let's say we never heard who goes where. Could the mind envision that if you obey, you'll be punished, and if you disobey, you'll be rewarded? without hearing what the Quran says yet.
Yeah.
The mind says it's possible. Those things could happen. But we know they're not going to happen because the Quran tells us if you obey, you're going to go to Jannah, and if you disobey, you're going to go to Jahannam. So why? Do you see why he says it's jaiz, it's possible, but it's nothing. You need to think a little bit. Do you understand? Did I lose anyone? Be honest.
So naqli and aqli can contradict each other?
We don't say contradict, but each one has a judgment.
Okay.
So I can say, so right now I can say, Habib, for a kafir to go to Jannah, what's the ruling? You could tell me, naqli, religiously, impossible. Why? Because the Quran says he will go to Jahannam. But aqli, intellectually, it's possible. Why? Because the mind can imagine or envision a kafir entering Jannah. Right? So sometimes the case, one specific case, in this case, can a righteous believer be put in the hellfire forever? Religiously, I give a judgment on this. Intellectually, I give a judgment on this. For example, another example they give is Jannah, the ruling on if Jannah and Jahannam can come to an end. Religiously, we know Jannah and Jahannam will never end. خالدين فيها أبدا. Religiously, we know the religious judgment is Jannah and Jahannam are forever. It is impossible they end religiously. But intellectually, without looking at the scripture, can the mind imagine Jannah and Jahannam coming to an end?
If you believe in it though already, then no, right? Because if you believe in afterlife and paradise or hell, then
Well, but he's saying outside.
No, we're not saying it's going to happen. We're saying, let's say somebody asks you intellectually, without taking from the scripture, can the mind imagine or conceive Jannah and Jahannam coming to an end? We say intellectually it's possible, but religiously it's not going to happen. Right now, me, Murad, is it intellectually? Because intellectually, is it possible I could be returned to non-existence? I become non-existent again. I go back to non-existence. Yeah. Intellectually, it's possible. Religiously, though, impossible. Why? Because the religion tells us you're either going to go to Jannah or Jahannam forever. You're not going to go back to non-existence. So, on a case, you could look at it from what is the intellectual judgment or what is the religious judgment. You get what I'm saying, Habib? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, how do you deal with when like the religiousness and the aql have different like answers? Does like one have precedence over the other? Or?
It's impossible to be contradicted.
No, it depends on what case are you, what angle are you looking at it from, right? Like if somebody says to you, so the atheist asks, if the atheist asks us, can God just destroy all of the creation and make it go non-existent again?
Yes.
This we could say yes, intellectually this is possible. But we know that's not going to happen because religiously we're told we go to one of two places forever. Right? So depending on how we're being asked or what's the ruling, you give an answer. Right?
But in terms of personal belief, we always go with the naqli over the aqli, right? If they contradict.
They can't contradict.
I wouldn't say they contradict. I mean, they have
if they have different answers.
Yeah, they have different answers. I'm not saying, look, when we're talking about Aqida, we're talking about things from what is their ruling in relation to the intellect, or what is their ruling in relation to the deen. I'm not saying go out to everybody and say Jannah and Jahannam, it's intellectually possible they can come to an end. What you said is true, but people are going to look at you like, what do you say? Because they don't know yet what's the difference between hukm al-aqli and hukm al-shari, right? We as Muslims, we are abiding by the Sharia. We are acting according to Sharia, right? But we know it's intellectually possible that these things could happen. But they're not going to happen because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, for example, Jannah and Jahannam are going to be forever and we're going to go to one of them forever. But intellectually, is it possible we could all non-exist again? We could all go back to nothingness, to non-existence? It's possible. But does that mean it's going to happen? No. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says we're going to go to one of two places forever. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's not about like, yes, as Muslims we have an aqeedah and we're acting upon that. We're just looking at things from how are they intellectually? What is their ruling intellectually? Because we need this to defend our creed. Right? If somebody says to us, are you saying, if an atheist says to us, Do you believe Jannah and Jahannam are necessary for existence? We say no. But they exist. Their existence is a possibility, and they exist, and they're going to be forever, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned they're going to be forever. Right? So it just goes back to how are you looking at the case? And you're going to look at the case depending on the situation you're being addressed with. If an atheist asks you a certain question, you have to deal mostly aqli. Mostly aqli, right? If an atheist is asking you a question, most of the time you're going to deal with him in an aqli point of view, because he doesn't accept the naql. But if you're dealing with a Muslim, like if you're dealing with a Muslim who believes that Jannah and Jahannam come to an end, which is kufr to believe, then here you're going to use the naqli proof. You're going to show him from the Quran and from the Sunnah, Jannah and Jahannam will not come to an end. So depending on the question that is being addressed to you, you will either use aqli or naqli judgment. Is that clear? Who had a question? Anyone? Everybody good?
I was going to add real quick that Imam Maturidi said that it's impossible that Aql and the Naql contradict, because Allah Himself is the one who created the Aql.
Yes, there's no contradiction
between
the Aql and the Naql in Islam. But if you look at a particular case from the Aql and from the Naql, the judgment might be different. There's no contradiction. In Islam we use the Aql and the Naql. There's no contradiction between the intellect and Islam. Because everything we believe about Islam it falls under the intellectual judgments. So we believe Allah exists and that His existence is necessary. So this is a wajib. We believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is exalted beyond death. Death is impossible in relation to Him. So this is mustahil. We believe that it's possible Allah could make me rich. So this is jaiz. That we use in Islam the aql and the naql. And everything we believe from the ghaib, from the sam'iyat, all of that is jaiz. The mind can imagine those things are real. Or can envision or affirm those things can happen. Is that clear? So depending on who in the final closing, depending on what question you're being asked and who is asking it, you might give the hukm al-shar'i or you might give the hukm al-aqli as a Muslim. Is that clear? Atheist is talking to you, most likely you're going to use what hukm? Aqli. Another Muslim is debating with you, most likely you're going to use naqli or shar'i. Right? Is that clear? Tamam.
So,
yes.
I guess, would you ever use adi, which is habitual evidence? Is that something you could use?
Yeah, because usually you'll use the adi also sometimes with a relation to atheists.
Okay.
Because the atheist will say, no, it's impossible. An atheist is going to fall under either the tabi'iyyin he's going to fall under tabi'iyyin. Why? Because at least the aqliyin, they believe Allah created that. But the atheist doesn't believe in that. So the atheist will say, for example, the atheist will claim it's impossible that burning not happen when there's fire. We will tell him, for example, are there cases where the relationship between two things that you assume are solid and irreversible and inseparable, are there cases where it doesn't happen in science and in your experience? I think he has to admit yes. Right? Sometimes, and I've seen this too, I've seen cases, not personally seen this, but I've seen doctors explain this. There's a patient who has X, Y, and Z problem. And they give the same medicine they always give for X, Y, and Z problem. Believing what's going to happen? He's going to get cured. They give him the medicine for problem X, Y, and Z, he actually gets worse. He actually gets worse. So according to you, if these things are irreversible, then why do we see, we don't see it every day because we said it's the mercy of Allah that it's not going to happen every minute. But if you're saying to the atheist, if you're saying these things are irreversible, they cannot be separated from one another, then why do we see them happening every now and then? If it's possible to happen every now and then, if it's possible to happen once, it's possible to happen all the time. But it doesn't happen all the time. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will is that it will not happen all the time. But is it possible to happen? That's what I want to get from the atheist. Is it possible for these two things to be separated and not happen? He has to say yes. Because we see this bil mushahada, we see this happening sometimes. In outwardly with our witnessing. Right? So yes, we use hukm al-adi Like the atheist will say, the atheist will claim. Also, when you debate these people, you have to show them, okay, what, because we say al-hukmu ala shay fur'un an tasawwurihi, right? The concept of a thing is the ruling of a thing is a branch of its conceptualization. I'm very tired. I had no iman today. All right. So, for example, if you tell the atheist it's impossible that the dead come back to life, we Muslims believe the dead will come back to life. I ask him, which type of impossibility is it? Which type? Is it customarily impossible or habitually impossible? Or sorry. No, intellectually impossible or habitually impossible. Which one? Because there's a difference. And you have to show him there's a difference. So if he says, well, it's habitually impossible, I'll say habitually impossible, yeah, because we don't see it happening all the time. Right? We don't see the dead coming up back, we don't see the norm that when someone dies, they come back right back up to life. But intellectually, I say to him, can the mind conceive of somebody dead coming back to life? Imagine this happening. He has to say yes.
But that'll be a no, because if the body, like, if he's dead already, and the atoms are like dissolved. So
I would say to him, can you imagine all the atoms come back and the body's remade and he comes back out of his grave? Can the mind conceive of that happening?
Yeah.
That his body is reassembled, he comes back out of his grave.
What?
So yes. It's not. I'm not saying it's the ada. I'm not saying it's adi. I'm saying your intellect. What does your mind say? That is it possible that his parts could be brought back together and he'd come back out of his grave? Say yes, intellectually possible.
But is that something like, for example, saying like, is it possible for a man to give birth?
Is it possible for a man to give birth?
Yeah, adi it's not.
Adi it's not. But aqlan, could it be that the man was created with the uterus instead? Could it be that? Could it be possible before? Could the mind imagine that a man has a womb, or a womb, right?
Yeah.
And that he gives birth from that? Adatan, no, it's mustahil, and conceptual, habitually it's impossible.
But then if you say that to someone, then they would say, well, that property of having a womb could make them not a man.
Yeah. So if you're saying the definition of a man as he is, what is the definition of a man? First we have to establish that. If you're saying it's a man with this and this and this,
The private part.
then I would say yes. By this definition, it's impossible. By this definition.
Okay, so if someone were to say, if someone were to say that, God could make it happen if God wanted to.
If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala
Is
will.
that-
Intellectually speaking, I'm only speaking intellectually.
Yeah.
If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed, could it be that the man was the one who would have the womb and give the birth?
Yes.
It's possible. But is that what happened? No. Right? So, is it possible, mentally possible? We could have been created with wings.
Yeah.
Possible. Mentally, the mind says that could have been possible. Did it happen? No. So there's a difference between declaring something intellectually possible as opposed to what it is in reality now. Is it possible that there could be fire-breathing dragons? The mind conceptualizes there could be a large flying reptilian that breathes fire and wipes out entire armies. Yes, the mind says this creature is possible. But does that mean just because it's possible it's in existence? No. You get what I'm saying?
Wait, so are we saying intellectually is anything that our mind can
conceive? Intellectually possible, Habib, is anything your mind says can accept existing and also non-existing.
Okay.
Right? Is it intellectual? So is it possible I could have had brown skin?
Yes.
Yes. Because the mind says it's possible. Murad could have had brown skin, or he could have had skin that's not brown. Because both are intellectually possible for me. Right? Remember here, in the hukm al-aqli, we're only using the intellect to judge. We're just looking at things strictly from the intellect. Right? I'm not saying we as Muslims are only going to do things hukm al-aqli and no longer use the sharia. No. But we have to use hukm al-aqli in the way we deduce things in order to defend our aqeedah. Right? Because if you don't know the hukm al-aqli, the atheist already won. In his mind. Right? If you don't know the hukm al-aqli, you already lost. Because you can't even begin to defend Aqida. Because the atheist is only going to use hukm al-aqli with you. He's not going to say, the atheist will not quote hadith with you. Is that clear?
Yeah.
What time is it?
9:45.
9:45. Keep going. يلا. البحث عن المعرفة. Now we're going to talk about the topic related to marifa. Marifa means to have knowledge. Right? What is the meaning of marifa and how does it relate to the creed of the Muslim? But first, did everybody understand the different judgments?
Yeah.
Any questions? So remember, depending on the case, what we're talking about and who we're talking to, we might look at something from an intellectual, religious, or customary judgment. Tamam?
So going back to the judgments, like how are we making these judgments? Like the
I'm gonna
like what is the root?
I'm gonna do something I should have done a long time ago, which is use the spoon. All right, I'll draw it out.
Sheikh Murad, this comes down to like also this thing where it's like there's everything that we learn is from rationality, observation, and transmission.
Yes. All right. So we said, there's a eraser here?
Yeah, it's not.
You could just flip it.
That stuff doesn't erase stuff.
Oh, yeah, it does.
Is it intellectually possible it could be erased?
Yes. No, you just need like
wet towel.
What's the
like power.
Oh, there we go.
ID?
You have to do it really hard.
Oh.
Oh. Wow.
Just
Oh, the other side now.
All right, just ignore this over here, all right? Okay, so we said that there's three types of judgments we have. This doesn't work. We said there is, first and foremost, what is the first hukm we went over? Shar'i. Right? What is Shar'i?
كتاب الله المتعلق المكلفين على جهة
Yes. The religious judgment. So we have hukm, Shar'. What is fard, what is haram, what is wajib? How do we get these rulings? We take it from usul al-fiqh. Then we have a hukm that is what? This is dry.
The trick to make the markers last forever is to close the gap whenever you're not using them.
Sheikh Murad. You got it?
I got it.
No, I'm serious. Because people like write, then leave it open as they speak.
Was
that
Nadri?
What is it?
Was that
No, that is hukm adi.
That's not ID.
Hukm adi is what? The habitual judgment, right? Based on what? Based on repetition. So because I've seen every time I see fire, I see burning. Fire, I see burning. Fire, I see burning. I make a what? I make a hukm adi that if there's fire, there's going to be burning.
But hukm adi has to incorporate aql to a certain degree as well, right? Like you have to.
Yes. Here's something that's going to make your brain shake.
Okay.
If it's mustahil, adatan, habitually impossible, it's mumkin aqlan.
It's intellectually possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's something mustahil adatan for fire to be cold?
Yeah.
What's something habitually impossible based on the habit we see? Fire to be cold. But does the mind accept the possibility of fire being cold?
Yeah. So it's jaiz.
Yes.
aqlan.
So mustahil adatan is jaiz aqlan.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yeah.
Would we say that every habitual any judgment that's habitual is also jaiz aqlan?
Yeah.
The fact that you thought of it would also make it.
But if you're
jaiz.
looking, if you're the ad, because the ada can be broken. It's possible for it to be broken, right?
Yeah.
The ada is not the mulazama, the relationship between the cause and effect in hukm al-adi. We Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we believe it's a mulazama that's adiyah, it's a habitual relationship. It's not intellectually necessary. It's not intellectually necessary that when there's fire, there's going to be burning. It's possible there could be fire and no burning.
Yeah.
Right? Alright, so we have hukm al-shari, the religious judgment of a thing. Hukm al-adi, the habitual judgment, and then we have hukm al-aqli. Right? And hukm al-aqli divides into, we said, 3 types. Right? In hukm al-aqli we have wajib, which is what? Necessary. And we have, what's after it?
Jaiz.
Usually it's best to do mustahil. Mustahil, which is what, Habib?
Impossible.
Very good. Possible. And then we have jaiz, right? Which is what?
Possible.
Very good. Jaiz is possible. Now, look at this. Can I use these judgments for other than the hukm al-aqli?
Yeah.
Something possible, this. Can something be mustahil shar'i?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. What's something mustahil shar'i? Jannah and Jahannam coming to an end. The Sharia says Jannah and Jahannam will never end. Therefore, we know it's religiously impossible. But is it intellectually possible Jannah and Jahannam could come to an end?
Yeah.
Intellectually, yes. Religiously, no. Right? So you guys are asking, is there a relationship? Here it is. So you can sometimes use these cases for another judgment type. Right? I can say something is mustahil aqlan.
Yeah.
I can say something is mustahil adatan. I can say something is mustahil shar'an.
Yeah.
Right? But usually in Aqida, we're focusing on the aqli. So if I say it generally speaking, this is mustahil, usually what am I going back to? Aqli. Unless I'm being specific.
Yeah.
Like we say, ru'yatullah, seeing the ru'ya, seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we say it is wajib shar'an jaiz aqlan. Right? So, like I said, sometimes you're looking at a case. In one field, it's one ruling. In another field, it's another.
That's mustahil adi, right? Because it never happens.
The habit is that it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Right? But is it jaiz aqlan? Yes. Because Sayyidina Musa, we went over this with Ryan, why is it intellectually possible for a creation to be unable to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because Sayyidina Musa asked for it. And the prophets would never ask for something they know is impossible in the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
But isn't that a Shari'i proof?
We say seeing Allah is wajib shar'an. It is religiously necessary. Why? Because the religion says it's going to happen for the believers.
Oh, it's wajib shar'an for the mu'mineen. Not
For the mu'mineen.
Yeah.
That's what we mean.
But then what would the aqli?
Aqlan jaiz. It's possible intellectually.
But how would you prove that it's jaiz aqlan to a not like? Because that was a Shari'i reason.
Because we say this is going to be mentioned later on. Why is it intellectually possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could be seen? Is because we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, and anything that exists, it is possible for that thing to be seen.
Okay.
Right?
But
just because it exists doesn't mean we see it. But is it possible for something? Is it possible for us to see it? Yes.
so like if you tell someone like they can see air.
Yes.
Or
Yes. We say, is it possible that circumstances could be put in place where we could be able to see air? Yes. Either through technology or something happens with us where we're more receptive to these things, we can start seeing that. You have animals and other creatures that can pick up things and see things we can't. If it's possible for them, it's also possible for us. But the ada is, it's for them and not for us.
yeah.
You know what we're saying? Is it possible for a human being to see jinn? Could it happen?
Yes.
Yes, but the ada, no.
No.
Right? You know, someone had a question, yes.
So, every single judgment falls into at least two or three of these categories, right?
Yes, you can use something, you can look at something religiously as being necessary and possible or intellectually or habitual.
So I mean, like a judgment can be religious and intellectual, or
You can look at a particular case from the religious perspective and from the intellectual perspective. Right? Like me being non-existent. Again, I was non-existent. But me going back to non-existence. If I look at it from the intellectual point of view, I say it's possible. I could go back to non-existence. If I look at it from the religious point of view, it's impossible. Why? Because I'm told you're going to go to one of two places. Inshallah, Jannah. Right? So, sometimes you're looking at one particular case, one statement, and you can look at it from different angles. But usually, when we talk about the statement in and of itself, we're looking at it from the aql standpoint. Okay?
So is it safe to say that every single thing has a aqli hukm?
Yeah.
Okay. But
Everything that when we talk about anything we talk about, we can classify it as with a mental classification.
But some things.
Even if it's non-existent, yeah.
Yeah.
Like a unicorn. Unicorn, is it existent? As far as we know, no. But does the intellect say it's necessary to exist? No. It's not necessary for a unicorn to exist. Is it impossible? The mind says there's no way whatsoever a unicorn can be real. No. Because why? You can imagine a horse has a horn. That's it. So what does the mind say? It's possible there could be a unicorn.
So what's
Just because it's possible doesn't mean it's in existence. It just means that the mind says it's possible this thing could happen.
So is there would not be a shar'i hukm on a unicorn existing?
Because I guess shar'an,
Yeah.
you could say it's jaiz because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says وَيَخْلُقُ مَا يَشَاءُ. Allah says He creates whatever He wills.
Okay, so then that means, I mean, to me, I understand that every single thing has shar'i hukm and adi hukm and aqli hukm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm saying, when you pick something to analyze, right, you can look at it from these three angles,
Okay.
right? Dragons, I can look at it from these three angles, okay? Dragons are not real, but still I can judge them. Give a judgment based on what I know. Some people ask me, what does Islam say about aliens? I say intellectually it's possible. Habitually, I don't know because there's nothing yet to confirm or deny they're there. Religiously, is it possible? We could say yes, it's possible Allah created another creation. Although I believe aliens are jinn. What people call aliens, they are different types of jinn people experience. But if somebody asks existence of the jinn, what do we say? Intellectually, possible. There could be another sentient being besides human beings. Habitually, adatan, I don't know. I can neither deny or confirm because I haven't had a relationship to... Does anybody here have a relationship with jinn that they know that they're but religiously, I say yes, they exist. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned they exist. So you have a case, and from that case you can look at it from these three ways. But usually, like I said, in Aqida, we look at it from the intellectual point of view. Unless we mention otherwise. Is that clear?
Yeah.
You're laughing, what's fine?
I was just I kind of, you were going to start the next section, and then everyone was kind of like, and then Nafis asked a question. I was like, it just took me back to school days when we wanted the period to be over.
I want it to be over too.
He asked a question.
But I'm very tired, but you guys, it's your haq to be here to 10 o'clock. Unless you agree you want to leave. I won't hold you. But your right is to be here till 10 o'clock because you guys paid for this, right?
Yeah.
So it's not fair teacher, I'll close it at 9:30. And you all, go home. But if you guys want to leave, it's fine. But your right from me, the right I give you is that you have to go to 10. But if you guys want to leave early, I'm okay with that too. Huh?
It was 9:59.
Yes, okay, alhamdulillah. Yes.
Would everybody want to start 30 minutes earlier, maybe at 6:30 to 9:30?
I don't think we should change it.
No.
I don't think we should change it.
Eventually,
once there's
is going to be out.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Right now we have to be patient because Balkov is here.
Okay.
But I also need to sleep and relax from Marina.
Yeah.
So I need some...
Okay.
When I come back. Because I finish at 4. Alright?
Sheikh Murad, one last question.
Yes.
So when we are saying these are judgments of what?
They're more like
concepts?
perspectives.
Concepts?
With judgments of a case. Of something we're gonna an idea, a thought, a concept, like something anything that we want to analyze, we could judge it with this. Even if it's not necessarily existing yet. Like a dragon. Right? I like dragons. Or I like the idea of a dragon. Dragons are not real as far as we know. But the idea of a dragon, how can I analyze it? I can analyze it through this. So, I can say a dragon, intellectually possible. Habitually, as far as I know, habitually impossible. Because I've never seen a dragon to have a relationship and confirm he's there. But religiously, I can say it's possible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He will, He could create a dragon. Right? So, what I'm saying is, you have an idea, a case you want to analyze, you can look at it from these three lenses. Is that clear?
Yes.
I'm not saying every time something comes up, you got to look at it from this and this and this, and we got to look at it from all. No. I'm just saying, you have a case, you can look at it either from this, or from this. But usually in Aqida, we're looking at it from Hukm al-Aqli. تمام؟ سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Please, we moved from WhatsApp to Telegram. We're moving on up. So in Telegram, if you have any questions, post them in Telegram. Alright, try to leave the WhatsApp group. And if there's anything unclear, you need more information on, feel free to message in there, inshallah.
Let's pray actually real quick. Who's down? I'm down. If you're down, stay. If you're not down, don't stay.